Before us is a novel describing the fierce struggle of a young protagonist transported from another dimension. Our hero fights numerous heroes native to the continent. Choi Han comes out of the darkness and meets a woman who gives him a hand, as well as the people of the village of Harris, to whom he had become very attached. But the whole village, where he found people he could call family and friends, is dead. All the villagers were brutally slaughtered by some secret group. Choi Han, who wields explosive power and has lived for decades in the Forest of Darkness, unable to even hurt a human being for the first time, sent people to the other world. The man from the group was puzzled as to who had attacked them, and loudly asked the young man who he was. But he did not dignify him with an answer and continued his furious attack. A man from the faction ordered Choi Han to be killed, and everyone pointed their swords at him. The whole village was in flames. Fire ashes were flying around and everything was covered with black smoke. He made one last precise and crushing blow with his sword. Around him lay the many lifeless bodies of his opponents. After he killed all the men in the group, he started to come to his senses. In the reflection of the sword, one of the village houses, where once there was a quiet and peaceful life, flashed in the reflection of the sword. Choi Han was in deep despair because it was now impossible to extract a single bit of information from the lifeless bodies. Having taken someone's life for the first time and knowing the bitterness of loss, our hero decided to leave the village. In the territory's central city, Hennetus Kale, who is related to Choi Han, was beaten to a pulp. When our hero wakes up, he sees himself in the mirror and sees Kale in front of him. Borrowing the book Birth of a Hero on his day off, he simply falls asleep reading it and wakes up in Kale's body. He looks at himself in the mirror in bewilderment and ponders his rebirth. As he continues to look in the mirror, he is disappointed to realize finally that he is in Kale's body. Kale's entire bathroom is filled to the ceiling with water vapor. Lying in a warm bath, he realizes that he has nothing to regret because he was an orphan and had no money, no one who loved him, and no friends. He realizes he was just Kim Rok-soo, who survived and couldn't afford to die. He doesn't like death and pain. He notices that there's no scar and reflects that he hasn't met Choi Han yet. He recalls that before he met Choi Han, Kale got drunk at a bar and started a riot because he didn't like the drinks. He hurt his side in the process. Still in the tub, he's thinking about not knowing what happened to Kale afterward. Though Choi Han met his destiny, overcame hardships, and became a hero, Kim Rok-soo, who happened to be Kale, had a simple motto. He is resolute and unwavering in saying he will not be beaten. Getting out of the bathtub, he says he'll make the story go on, but without the part with his beating. Luckily, he remembers the contents of the first part of the novel and decides to give it a try. Suddenly, he hears Ron asking if he's in the bathroom. Putting his robe on his slightly wet body, he replies that he'll be out soon. Ron hands him a cup of water with a smile and goodwill. At that moment, he remembers that Ron is an assassin who only pretends to be kind. He gets the idea to set him up with Choi Han as soon as possible. After he steps back, Ron's smile is no longer kind. There's a glint of guile in his eyes. Kim Rok-soo thinks he needs strength to defend himself. If he plans to live on a continent where a battle is about to break out, he needs strength. The young gentleman is offered help to dress and decides to choose something simple. When he puts on his clothes, he thinks that because of his looks and physique, everything fits him perfectly. He walked with Ron into the hallway, where the girls on either side of him bowed and greeted him. One of the girls trembled and stuttered as she wished good morning. He was surprised to see that, because Kale never hit people, but when he got drunk, he'd smash things up. But then he thought he was better off because no one would hurt him. Ron opened the door for him and wished him a pleasant appetite. The young master offered him something to eat too. As he approached the table, he froze and looked carefully ahead of him. Kale's family appeared before him, watching him intently. Kale's father's name is Darrett. He is the current head of the county of Hennetus. Stepmother's name is Violan. She is the countess of this county. Kale's younger brother is named Basin. He doesn't look kindly in his direction. A younger sister, who's not exactly friendly either, named Lee. As he continues to look at the family, he hears one of the family members reproach him for being late today and suggests that he sit down. As he sits down at the table, he thinks about the fact that the family is not distinguished by strength or power, but simply has an impressive fortune. Stepmother looked at him contemptuously, for she had always tried to avoid contact with him. The children looked at him with disdain for the same reason the mother did. He thought it was the ideal conditions for a comfortable life, apart from the stares from his family. Sticking his fork in his food, he decides to eat quickly and leave because he thinks they're not comfortable with him. His face stretched into a smile as he ate, for it was the first time he had eaten such delicious meat. My brother noticed his smile for the first time and dropped his fork in surprise, then apologized for his action, but still looked at his brother in fear while he didn't understand what was happening to him. Kale noticed the wine and brought it up to sniff and taste it. The father was extremely surprised at his son's not-so-common behavior. Suddenly, the father exclaimed that he was pleased to see his son eating with gusto. Rock-Soo thought that being mannerless was really the best thing since no one would accuse him of having no manners. As he ate the next bite, he thought it was better to live safely as the feudal lord's older brother. Brother still gazed at him with distrust and contempt. Wiping his mouth with a napkin, he concluded that if the rapprochement didn't work out, he could go where there was no war. Suddenly, his father came up to him and asked him if he needed anything right now. He pondered Derrita's words to see if he needed anything. It suddenly hit him. Of course he needed money to stay here comfortably. His father replied that he would give as much as he could. Kale smiled in return. He continued to smile his wide, satisfied, and happy smile. He was given a piece of paper that said how much money his father had given him. He was very surprised at how rich the family was. Rock-Soo thought about the fact that this family had an incredibly large amount of money. Shoving the paper into his pocket, he decided he had a new plan and called Ron over. Ron came in and answered his question about what day it was with precision. He decided he had to hurry, because according to the script, Choi Han will soon come to see him here in Weston. Our hero entered the library and saw the owner of the library. The people sitting in the library were very frightened by his arrival. The owner of the library calmly walked over to him and placed the book on the table. His name was Bilos. He greeted him with a cheerful and friendly wave of his hands in opposite directions. Kaylee looked at Bilos and noted that he looked like a piggy bank. Throwing the coins on the librarian's desk, he announced that he would be on the third floor all day and waggishly told him to serve him any tea except sour tea. He folded his arms and asked about the availability of novels and poems. Bilos cheerfully told him that there were. Rock-Soo ordered to serve him the most interesting book and tea. When he gave the librarian the coins, the latter, with a much indignant face, replied that it was a great deal for one day, even if you drink a gallon of tea. To which he casually withdrew his hand and said he had a lot of money, and it was a tip. He sat down thoughtfully at a wooden table surrounded by many shelves of books. He remembered that this was where Choi Han had come to report on what had happened in the village, but the guards had chased him away in the early morning. He remembered that at that moment, Choi Han's thoughts were first of a normal funeral for the village, and then only about who he had killed. Suddenly, a picture of the past popped into his head when he wasn't in Kale's body. Kale claimed that one glass of his liquor was worth more than the lives of the villagers. Choi Han said that was an interesting thought. He wondered if he would change his mind. Suddenly furious, he lunged at Kale and grabbed his face. With such a sudden memory, Rock-Soo crossed his arms and goosebumps ran down his back. After experiencing fear and a lot of nervousness, he decided that he would forget about the contents of the book. Suddenly something caught his attention and his gaze went to the window. Outside the window, Choi Han himself stood in front of two guards with guns. One of the guards reached out to him with the intention of asking for identification. He turned his back on them, realizing that they wouldn't let him in for lack of ID. With a hand to his face, Rock-Soo confirmed his hunch that he had no ID. A disappointed Choi Han turned around and walked away from the guards. But after nightfall, he'll jump over the wall and come through here. The librarian squinted and saw Kale coming down the stairs. He came down the stairs and warned me that he'd be gone for a while so that his place wouldn't be occupied. As Kale walked past the other library patrons, they all also felt fear around him. As he opened the door, the visitors stared at him. The door slammed loudly, causing everyone to feel fear again. The visitors were drenched in cold sweat. They had grimaces of horror on their faces. They were surprised that Kale hadn't broken anything. Rock-Soo had an indifferent face. He heard those exclamations about how he hadn't even broken anything. He decided to change his mind because he had other things to think about. He had to find the strength to defend himself to fight back against strong men. Walking down the street, he thought that he shouldn't be too strong or something would happen that would hurt a lot. He looked up at the low emerald canopy and thought about something. But he was thinking about an ancient power. The power of the incorporeal shield. The power of magic. A golden, hot, steamy croissant appeared in front of his eyes. Then a multitude of buns appeared before his eyes. At that moment, he was determined that today he would get the foundation to get that indestructible shield. Suddenly, he was seen by a salesman from this very bun shop. He shouted loudly in surprise. The young gentleman looked at the frightened and shaking old man. He said he wanted to take the bread. The old man's mouth gaped open in disbelief. Kale looked at the old man, lifted his hand, and extended his finger, and pointed to the bread that was on the countertop of the bread counter. Then pointed his finger to the other end of the counter and said he wanted to take the bread from here to wherever his hand stopped. The coin fell loudly on the table with a long jingling sound and then fell silent. The old man looked at the coin in surprise, not believing his eyes. Rock-Soo gave him a piercing look and stated that if he wasn't satisfied with something, he could go see someone else. He came out of his stupor and said he'd do it right away, and promptly retreated into the depths of his bread counter. Picking up the huge sack of bread and slinging it behind his back, Kale noted that his surroundings were unfamiliar. I added to myself that this was clearly not Korea, but a real fantasy world. It began to get dark outside. The streetlights came on, continuing to illuminate the roads with a bright, warm light. He was still carrying his sack and noticed the many eyes on him. He screwed up his face in a disgruntled grimace because he realized that Kale was regularly being unreasonable. Stomping down the street, he decided he had to get to the bottom of this case. Two children watched him curiously from behind one of the wooden columns of the house. Climbing a fairly high hill, he came to a small stone structure. Beside him, he threw his sack off his shoulders and exhaled in relief. When he looked back, he realized what an incredible height he had climbed. The whole city spread out before him like a palm, and then he noted that bread in such quantities was quite heavy. Turning back to the structure, he saw a very old door in front of him. With his hand on the door, he pushed it open with an effort. The door creaked open. When he went inside, he saw something that really struck him. It was the oldest, tallest tree shrouded in thick leaves. He stared at it, mesmerized. It looked to him like the tree was at least several hundred years old, if not more. Suddenly, he heard a child's voice telling him to stay away from the tree. There were two kids standing near the entrance who had followed him into town earlier. They said not to go near the tree because it eats people. This tree is called the cannibal. There are all sorts of scary rumors about it. People in town say that those who hang themselves on it at night dry up. Rock-Soo smirked contentedly, for this was clearly the tree he needed. A long time ago, there was a man who was in the service of God. But because of his obsession with food, he was cast out for the sin of gluttony. When he died, a tree grew where his body was and absorbed that man's resentment and power. He crouched in front of the tree and stuck his hand into the bread bag while thinking that it contained the power of the indestructible shield he was looking for. Throwing the bread under the roots of the tree, he heard the children shouting that he shouldn't do that and he might go to the other world, but it only made him laugh. Putting his hand to his face, he thought irritably that all worlds had overly inquisitive children and should be escorted out as soon as possible. He stood up abruptly and started walking toward the rather frightened children. The kids stared at him and kept talking about how the tree was eating people and he was going to the other side of the world. He threw them a couple bags of bread, said he wasn't going to the other side, and told them to leave. The smaller boy rushed to pick up the bags, but the older one still stood his ground. Rock-Soo looked at them with a very intimidating look and asked a rhetorical question about whether they knew Kale. The children trembled at his words, and the brother asked the older sister to leave, and she agreed. They turned around and started walking away, and the older one finally said he shouldn't die. He just made an annoyed face and clucked unhappily. He walked over to the tree again, took one look at it, and decided to start again. He reached into the bag again and pulled out a large loaf of bread. When he threw the loaf to the roots of the tree, it disappeared instantly. He was a little frightened because it looked like it was going to suck his hand in with the loaf. The shield is a remnant of the man who died of starvation. With a smile on his face, he thought it was an ancient power. There was still a dark hole gaping near the tree. He thought he could trust this kind of traditional stuff. Rock-Soo recalls reading that the tree must be fed until the darkness disappears. This darkness is the embodiment of resentment. The book said that when the darkness is dispelled, the light will appear, and if he sees that light, the unbreakable shield will be his. He took a sack and started pouring all the bread into the hole, at the same time telling the tree to eat more. After emptying his bag, he noticed that the darkness hadn't gone anywhere. After thinking about it, he decided that about 10 more bags should be enough. Rock-Soo once again excitedly looked at the dark hole where only darkness could be seen. He wondered how much offense he had taken. The whole thing seemed kind of creepy. The ogre tree was still standing. He decided that he would come back here tomorrow. Walking through town, he saw the same children munching on his bread. He figured they were scared anyway and wouldn't go near the tree. but it would be very unpleasant if they stuck their heads in the hole and got eaten, certainly for them, but not for him. The crumb-strewn children stared hungrily at him. Rock-Soo warned that if they wanted to eat bread tomorrow, they would have to keep quiet about his trips to the tree. After visiting the library again, he goes down the spiral staircase. He walks up to the librarian's desk. The librarian asks him if he's leaving. Rock-Soo replies that he is and says he hopes to see him again, and adds that the tea was great and the book was interesting, even though he didn't get halfway through it. He liked the growing protagonist getting recognized for his skills and added that he shouldn't let others read it. The librarian listened attentively, and at the end, he said he would definitely put the book aside for him. After walking him to the door, the owner added that he should definitely come again and that he would be waiting for him. Rock-Soo thought that was unlikely. After a while, he goes to a local inn that Kale's been to before. He is greeted inside by an incredibly frightened innkeeper. Surprised and frightened by his arrival, he begins to bow. Rock-Soo notices that he is afraid of him, and it's only natural, because where Kale drank, everything got trashed afterward. He tossed a coin to the innkeeper and told him to bring him a bottle of regular and a roasted chicken breast without salt. The employee stammered about whether he wanted to sit here. He didn't dignify him with an answer, and he rushed off and said he'd bring it right away. The inn was completely silent. No one dared to say a word. He clucked loudly, noting that all the thieves and slackers here tried not to look at him, which seemed atypical to him. Usually the noble scoundrels hang around with brigands and mercenaries. Kale, however, despised such men. He noted that to Kale, people like those in this inn were parasites. He was soon served the bottle he had ordered and a small bag of food. As he walked out of the inn, he was stared at by terrified customers. He noted that if it was Kale's drink, it must be the most expensive. A small amount of booze poured out of a newly opened bottle. He leaned the bottle to his lips and greedily began to drink the contents. After sipping some of it, he sighed in relief and wiped his mouth with his hand. A little while later, he felt his insides burning from the drink. In that direction along the wall, near which he was now walking, at a distance of about 100 paces from the entrance. Just as he expected here the moment Choi Han jumped over the wall, he noticed a kitten carefully licking the fur of another kitten. He thought that this world might be full of such accidents. When he saw Choi Han, he remembered that in the script of the book, in order to avoid falling on the kittens, he twisted his ankle in flight. An exhausted Choi Han sat with his back against the wall and his head bowed down. When he noticed Kale approaching, he turned his expressive gaze toward him. Rock-Soo was getting chills at the sight of him. He thought a pre-drink was a good idea, so he decided to try and make a good impression. He told the kittens that they looked hungry, then pulled out a small package containing a golden chicken breast. He put it on the ground and told the poor, unfortunate creatures to eat. The kittens began to approach the bundle, and that's when Rock-Soo realized they were younger than he expected. Then he started breaking the chicken breast into several small pieces for the kittens to chew. The kitten jumped up tensely and began to meow protestingly without a word. Then he petted the kitten and told them to eat, to make them feel better. In this way, he was showing kindness to Choi Han. As he continued to watch the kittens eat and pet them, he asked him if he had somewhere to go. Choi Han remained silent. He didn't move and continued to sit in the same position. Still without turning around, he asked if he had a place to sleep and if he was hungry. As he continued stroking the satisfied kittens, he thought that his silence was quite expected. He was probably scrutinizing him. Then he asked him a question about whether he wanted to answer him. Choi Han finally said the words. He said he was hungry. Rock-Soo then started walking and stood right in front of him, spreading his legs wide. He told him to follow him, for he had concluded that the easiest way to make a good impression was to feed a man well. Choi Han looked at him hopefully, but there was still a flicker of distrust in his eyes. But still, in spite of his disbelief, he got up and followed him with the same lowered head. Rock-Soo thought he hated cats, but he thought these particular ones were pretty cute. Suddenly, one of the kittens he'd just been feeding rubbed up against his leg. Then he suddenly noticed Choi Han's gaze on him and realized that pretending not to notice them would not work. Pretending to be really worried about the kittens, he sat down and started to pet one of them, saying that even though they liked him, he should hurry up. Gently stroking one of the kittens, he said that they would see each other again soon. And then the kittens, as if they understood what he was saying, scurried away. Then they continued on their way, and Rock-Soo sighed with relief because he was finally rid of those kittens. A building with an archway appeared in front of them. He thought that of course he had to pretend to Choi Han that he didn't understand his actions. but Choi Han is probably carefully analyzing whether it's easy to send him to the other side. Suddenly, they stopped in front of an archway. Rock-soo turned around in bewilderment and looked at his companion. He had an intimidating face that completely confirmed his thoughts. Starting to turn back around, he decided to see if he would go with him next. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by one of the guards, who saw the two of them outside the county building. He turned to him, stammering. He thought he'd rather no one stuttered when addressing him. It was a little unpleasant for him to hear someone stutter again when talking to him. The guards offered to let them in, and they both followed inside the building. Ron respectfully greeted the young master with a slight bow. Seeing Ron in front of him, he thought he was a pretty creepy old man for waiting here in the same place all the time. The old man looked carefully at the guest Rock-soo had brought. Choi Han looked back. His gaze was studious without being kind. Rock-soo began to see sparks flying between the two. He told Choi Han to follow him. And then they started up the stairs. Ron was worried and offered to escort the man, but he refused. He added to himself that he didn't need them to sizzle at each other. Hans, who was overjoyed at Mr. Hans's return, suddenly looked out from around the corner and greeted him. He remembered that Hans, the deputy butler, was assigned to him. When he took out the bottle, Hans even cried out in fear that he would throw the bottle on the floor. Rock-soo told him to carry the bottle away and warned him that he would throw it next time. Politely calling him my lord, he also awkwardly blushed in fear and asked where he was going. It turned out they were heading to the second kitchen. Rock-soo had a plan he was following. Choi Han had one more person to meet today. He grinned contentedly when he saw Ron the mercenary's son in Bikros's kitchen. He noted that Bikros is a pretty creepy person to be cooking with that creepy look and hands. Choi Han must have met him, because when Bikros witnessed his strength while beating up Kale, he followed the protagonist. He had the clever idea to quickly sell him to Choi Han, and then Ron would follow them. It's like knocking down two pins in one shot. Putting his arm around Choi Han by the shoulder, he demanded some food. Bikros looked at them disdainfully, holding a large knife in his hand. Rock-soo asked, putting it down, and again demanded to be fed if he was hungry. He finally succeeded. Bikros said that he understood him and started to prepare food for the guest. He pictured Bikros, Ron, and Choi Han as Skittles and thought happily that all three of them were now connected. Even Ron, who hadn't expected it. He had a satisfied grin on his face because everything was going according to his plan. With a wave of his hand, he said to cook him too, of course, all the best, and added that the steak he cooked last night tasted incredible, saying that he was a great cook and that since the steak was so good, he'd have a great dinner. He also added that he was looking forward to it. Hans suddenly came up to him and asked in puzzlement what to do with his guest. Choi Han just stood silently without saying a word and watched what was happening around him. Rock-soo replied that he was his guest and should be treated accordingly. Then he thought that since they had met, the important things were over. He also added that if it doesn't work, he'll do something to get Choi Han to beat up someone else and make Bikros see it. He then told Hans not to bother his guest and just bring the food to his bedroom as it was ready. After these events, Hans reported to Kala's father that he had visited the tea house run by Flynn's illegitimate son and brought a strange young man. Dad noted that, unlike how he usually is, he drank within reason. Hans offered to have someone assigned to him, but Darrett rejected the idea, explaining that as long as it's on his land, whatever he does is in his jurisdiction. Then he told Hans to keep watching him and to report everything to him. He listened attentively and bowed. Dareth took a thoughtful pose and noted that Kale had changed quite a bit. He started talking about how Kale wasn't acting like his usual self. And of course, he didn't get smart and strong, but his behavior changed. He especially remembered a moment at the table when Kale was being quite polite and courteous. Darrett told Hans to get information about Flynn's illegitimate son. Looking out the window thoughtfully, he noted that Kale wasn't the only one who had changed. But the situation on the continent was also becoming turbulent. The county of Henitus was living peacefully, expanding and growing in wealth little by little. He remembered telling his children when they were young not to make history, but to live for happiness and peace. He walked away from the window, determined to strengthen the city walls. Rock-soo felt a discomfort in his stomach from the morning. The sight of Ron bringing lemonade instead of water made him even more nauseous. Ron said he was sleeping too soundly, so he didn't wake him up. Suddenly, he noticed Ron had hurt himself and decided to ask him about it. He asked Riley if he was worried about him. Rock-soo replied that he wasn't, just annoyed by the bandage. Ron replied that it was nothing, but he had a picture of the battle with Choi Han in his mind. and he said it was a little kitten that had gotten its claws out and scratched him. Rock-Soo thought that this kitten must be an innocent person. He handed over the cup and reached for the door to open it when he heard a voice. Ron held up the cup he'd given him and asked him if he was leaving now. When he said he was leaving, he asked if he liked the lemonade. He turned around and said it was delicious, clearly not understanding why he was in such a bad mood today. With undisguised irritation, he thought about why he was asking that question. As he opened the door, his eyes fell on the guest he'd brought last night. The guest, Choi Han, appeared right outside the door. Not expecting to see him in front of him, he abruptly slammed the door right in his face. Clutching at his heart, he slowly began to come to his senses and was very angry at Ron, who in turn had not warned him that the guest was waiting for him outside the door. Ron looked at him mockingly and said he didn't think it would scare the young master. Now he warned him that the guest was waiting at the door, with the excuse that the gentleman had opened the door so quickly that he had no time to say a word, and added that the guest was very eager to meet him. The angry Rock-Soo thought he had done it on purpose. Finally, he decided to go out to him and ask him what was wrong. He did nothing at all and just stood there. After a while, he suddenly said something about food. Not quite knowing what Choi Han was talking about, he looked at him questioningly and asked the same question. Choi Han's eyes opened wide and glistened. He put his hand to his heart and promised to work off the food he'd been given. Rock-Soo got very angry upon hearing his words and said that there was no need to think that he wasn't crazy to use him as a labor force. But he said he had a request and clenched his hand into a fist. It was probably about the village of Harris. He said you don't need to ask him specifically, but told me to ask Hans, adding that he was a capable deputy butler. He told me to go to him because he could handle any routine request. He added that Ron was a capable man too and would listen to him. When he finished his words about Ron doing his best to help his guest, Choi Han looked at him indignantly and said he didn't know him at all. For him, they were meeting for the first time and were complete strangers to each other. In response, Rock-Soo began to resent why he had to know him. He just helped someone worse off than him, and added that he didn't think he'd be asking for something impossible, and if it turned out to be just that, Hans would refuse him. Then he turned around and started walking away, explaining that he had some unfinished business. He had a lot of money to burn today, so he decided to go get some pocket money from Dorita. As he walked away, he heard Ron say that he would definitely do his errand. Without dignifying him with an answer, he just turned away, thinking he didn't care whether he did it or not. The struggle is the concern of the protagonist and his companions. At the time, Ron thought it was rather curious that this intrepid pup hated sour food, and he still can't stand it, but he still drinks that lemonade. With a wicked grin, he thought the fearless pup was afraid, and then he squinted and thought he might know something. Suddenly, his attention was diverted by Choi Han telling him to lead the way. He looked at Ron dismissively. Ron immediately thought that this young man with the stench of human blood was pretending to be innocent. Even for a fractured man, he's fractured pretty badly. Then crossing his arms behind his back and holding the cup Kale was drinking from, he motioned for him to follow. Eventually, he and Rock-Soo went their separate ways and Choi Han followed Ron. Our Rock-Soo came to the ogre tree again with a new sack full of bread slung over his back. As he poured the bread into the dark hole, he heard the tree talking to him. It asked for more and more bread. When he heard the tree's voice, he was a little scared and thought it was creepy. The tree had never spoken to him before. He realized it was the voice of the young girl he'd read about. It was specified that a priestess loyal to God had died of starvation. Then he thought he didn't know why Darrett had told him to come to his office tonight, so he needed to get out of here, preferably before dark. After he dropped the bread, he realized he still wasn't enough, which meant he'd have to run more than he bargained for. The same kids he'd seen last time were sitting next to the tree. They munched on the bread he shared, and this time for their silence about what he was doing here. When he saw this sight, he clucked loudly because the children were only interfering with his work. He had already emptied yesterday's bakery. He concluded that it would take a long time to prepare that much bread. He had to find another place. Suddenly, someone stuttered and called him, "My lord." A panting woman ran up to him and announced to him that they had plenty of bread in the bakery. He thought the aunt was a good salesman and threw her a coin and told her to bring him everything they had and soon. With eyes full of admiration, she looked at the coin and glowed, obviously not believing that she had been given so much money. She told Rock-Soo to wait a second and went out the door to gather her supplies. After a while, he came out of the door with a huge sack of bread and laid it on the ground. When he saw that, he thought it was a good result. When she said they could bake more, he thought he liked her more and more. A guy shouted out from the bakery, confirming her words. When he heard this, he told them that next time he would buy at her bakery, told them to prepare a sack, and gave them another coin. He noted to himself that things were going smoothly, but he did not notice that someone was watching him from behind the wall of a neighboring building. It was Bikros, and he didn't know what he was doing. The only thought he had was that he was crazy. Even when his father called Kale busy, he didn't care for him. But the longer he watched, the more he agreed with him. He noted to himself that he was as interesting to watch as the black-haired boy. When Roxu went up the hill, the children were waiting for him. This time, he gave them a jar of greens instead of bread. They were disappointed to realize it wasn't cake either. He told them to leave, but the girls blocked him and kept telling him he couldn't die. Kim Roxu was an ordinary mediocre orphan, so in pity and sympathy, he thought a lot. He reasoned that his sympathy for these children was so necessary. It annoyed him. He was disgusted by the fact that little children were in pain, and of course, it made him want to hold them to his chest. But he couldn't afford it and kept trying to explain to them that he wasn't going to die. Then he walked over to the tree that was begging for more and more. He poured all his chuckle of bread into the hole again. He noticed that the color of the hole had then lightened a little, and told the tree that it was obliged to repay him for this expenditure. And then he turned around, but the annoying guys were gone. He was immediately relieved that the wounded children had disappeared from the horizon, but he was surprised to notice something else. The very kittens he had fed last night appeared before him. He was surprised that they still remembered him, but this time he didn't pet them and just waved them away. He decided he didn't need the hassle. After completing his business, he returned to the Hennitus County building to meet his father. Derek told him to go to the royal family as a representative of their house. Roxu didn't like that very much. He had more important things to do than going to the kingdom right now. Derek said he planned to send Basson first, but he's his firstborn. There's a big event in the kingdom. The children of all the noble families are invited. Although since the year before last, Basson's father said he'd rather go this time. He started remembering what happened in the book at the big event at the royal palace. And there was an incident of terrorism. In a crowded place, a secret group organized a terrorist attack. Choi Han was the one who prevented them from carrying out their plan. He saved many citizens in the square and so became associated with the royal family, and the crown prince in particular, becoming his friend. He got the creeps again at the memory and the fact that he was going to be sent there. He glanced at Basson and thought that it was said that he usually attended such events, so he could be told to go. At this time, Basson stood listening intently and realizing his father's speech. Then Roxu thought he couldn't send his brother there. He couldn't understand why Derek had decided to send Kale there. His father told him to leave in 5 days. He remembered that according to the book, that's when Kale was supposed to get his ass kicked by Choi Han and be in the county, which meant that in the original story, there was no way Kale could have gone. Derek reminded them that he had been the one to attend such events in the past. Roxu started making excuses that it was too sudden and asked to let him think about it. The father agreed and allowed them both to go. The two brothers began to walk away. Suddenly Basson called out to his brother and told him that he had every right to go there. Then he started to leave and Roxu thought he couldn't go there. Kale had been displaced from his place as heir of the family. His younger brother had been functioning as heir since the year before last. And now he's saying that Kale has the right to act as a spokesman for the family. It's not a good situation for him. But the problem is that the future is worth the risk. Kale will be out of mortal danger and new opportunities will open up. Nor would he want Basson to die before becoming a feudal lord. He must live for his quiet and peaceful life. Suddenly, Hans showed up looking for him. He wanted to talk about their guest. Then he told him to get a guest. Hans was rather surprised. Judging by the expression on his face, Choi Han's case had been resolved to some extent, and he had an event at the royal palace that wasn't in his plans. He told Hans to remind Choi Han of his debt if he suddenly refused to come. If he has to go there, he'll make it as comfortable as possible for himself and make Choi Han his trump card. When he saw him, he realized that Ron had been feeding him quite well because his face had lightened up, and Ron and Burkus and Choi Han had really hit it off. Only when he saw Kale, he got straight to the point and asked what he could use to work off his food. Roxu thought that he had already changed the first part of the book a bit, although he had hoped not to interfere. Going to the capital might involve even more changes. First, he wanted to see if he could handle it, so he decided to do a little interview. Choi Han didn't hesitate to start asking him, then he asked about whether he knew how to protect people. He replied in great surprise that he didn't know what he was talking about. Roxu thought he changed the plan in a hurry, but maybe it was for the best. He'll make sure Choi Han's party doesn't get hold of the ancient powers and take those powers to himself. Then he asked if he could protect people instead of sending them to the other side. Then he nervously replied that he didn't know and clenched his fists hard. Rock-Soo realized that the man was still unstable and asked if he could send the man to the other world. He said he could. Rock-Soo said that he can protect people then too. It's difficult, but not impossible. When he was Kim Rock-Soo, he couldn't just say it's complicated and go the other way, so he's perfectly content to live in Kale's body. But there were obstacles to his future. He needed an assistant. Choi Han agreed that it was difficult, but not impossible. Then he asked him the last and final question of the interview. He asked the simplest and most logical question possible about his name. Choi Han was surprised by the question and asked if he really didn't know his name, to which he replied that he did. But he's had other people call him, and he wants the guest to introduce himself. Then he proudly, and without hesitation, gave his name as Choi Han, and then happily extended his hand and told him his name was Choi Han again. Then they shook hands, and he also introduced himself by his full name, Kale Henadis. Rock-Soo explained that his job was quite simple and handed over a piece of paper. Choi Han was to protect a princess named Rosalind at the event. This princess survived an assassination attempt by a neighboring kingdom. He was also to protect the heir of the Wolf King, Lak. He was the last survivor of a mighty wolf family. He looked ordinary and frail, but he was tougher and more aggressive than anyone else when he got angry. Rosalind had the strongest destructive power, but she did not wish to take the throne. Her dream was to create the best magical tower on the continent. He recalls that in the book, all those who attempted to kill Rosalind were later tortured by Burkos. Such memories make his heart sink. When he came back to reality, he confirmed that Choi Han was right that he had two people to protect. He said he was glad he could read. Rock-Soo continued to consecrate his plan. He said he would follow him first and pulled out a map. Spreading it out on the table, he pointed out the place he would have to go and realized that he would just have to walk with Choi Han to the middle of the road. In one chapter of the first volume of The Birth of a Hero, one Marquise replaces Kale as the antagonist. He crossed the Crown Prince and Choi Han every now and then because he raised a crazy, huge dragon. He thought he had successfully tamed a dragon not 5 years old, but the dragon managed to escape and then finally broke down and went mad. Choi Han managed to defeat it and gave the dragon freedom and death. But Rock-Soo has to go through the same village that the dragon will attack. If he tried to bypass the village, he'd be late for the capital. He had to deal with him before he went crazy or leave it to Choi Han. He gave Choi Han the task of traveling with the people on the list he held in his hands. That was his entire task. He asked if he had to protect them. Rock-Soo replied that it didn't matter, but he had to get to the capital and meet him safe and sound in the capital. He asked if he could defend himself. Choi Han was silent for a while, but then he said he was up to the task. After which, Rock-Soo thought it was better to have a drink before talking to him. Then he waved his hand and told Choi Han that he was free to go and that everything they were talking about was to be kept secret. He replied that he understood. Night fell in Henadis County. Many stars twinkled in the sky. Rock-Soo went into his father's office again and asked for money. He agreed and told him to ask the treasurer for it. Lying on his bed, he looked at his father's check and thought that money was the best thing in the world. Suddenly, Ron appeared in his room. He brought him a lemon tea his son had brewed especially for Kale and said goodnight, reminding him that he was always there for him. After he left, Rock-Soo realized that the old man had chased away all his dreams, and he should have sold him to Choi Han as soon as possible. Since this morning, he felt like he'd watched a bone-chilling horror movie. Sitting on the chair in the county seat, he listened to Ron talk about hunting rabbits for him on the way, because he was good at it. Since the rabbit can escape at any moment, he will watch it carefully, and at the right moment send it to the afterlife, and then gut it. Rock-Soo thought that this creepy grandfather was very good at it, involuntarily remembering an episode from the book. At the bread counter, he met a clerk who said he was early today. He noticed that the salesman, after several meetings, was now reacting relatively calmly to him. While handing over the sack of bread, the seller asked if this was the last time the young gentleman had come to him. He patted him on the shoulder and told him that next time he wanted to eat, he'd be there. The old man looked at Rock-Soo in Kale's body as he walked away from him. On his way, he met the kids again and wondered if they were really homeless since they meet him at any hour. This time, not forgetting about them, he held out a couple rolls of bread. The children took and unsealed the bread and looked gratefully at the departing Rock-Soo, who did not say another word to them. He looked around and noticed it was pretty foggy today. That meant no one would notice what he was doing here and he'd get it. He dumped out his last bag when he saw that the hole was slowly turning white. Suddenly, the tree started asking for more and more, so loudly that he had to cover his ears. He noted that this was not in the book. Then the tree told him if he brought more, it would give him a gift. He told the tree to wait. He poured out another piece of bread and thought it should be enough to lighten the hole. The tree started to glow a lot and shouted that it was very, very delicious, such a delicate flavor, and said that the third bag was especially good. Added that apparently cooking has progressed over time, and in their time, there wasn't even such a word as bread. The tree continued to ponder the variety of wheat. He thought he must not wait for his power. It went on to say that in ancient times, there was nothing so delicious. People who worshipped God always brought some kind of nasty stuff, and she liked to eat good food. He needed the ancient power, so he had to listen to her story. She couldn't give up delicious food, even if she became a fat cow. He said it was a great review of the flavor of the food. Then she thanked him and said he was a good guy and understood her assessment. Rock-Soo suddenly noticed how the tree's foliage had turned unusually green. Suddenly, light began to pour from a hole under the tree. He reached out and felt warmth. Then he thought that was exactly what he needed. His face broke into a smile. Suddenly, the tree said it would protect him and shot a warm beam of light in his direction. The beam disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. It was a warm power of purest beauty. For the shield, the life of the wearer is the highest priority. The source of its energy and the main object of defense is the heart. The power does not disappear until it stops. He felt this power enveloping his heart. The dense protection made it beat harder. So the ancient forces, depending on the specifics, leave their mark. Now, if he uses an ancient power like it was written in Birth of a Hero, he'll have an unbreakable shield in front of him that will keep him out of harm's way at least twice. And even if Choi Han goes against him with his sword art, he can defend himself about twice. The indestructible shield, though it breaks, does not disappear. If a certain attack force is greater than its limit, the shield breaks but returns to the heart. His shield power is gradually being restored through his energy. Heartbeat is a source of energy. On the way to the capital, he will have a chance to strengthen his shield. And then even if someone of Choi Han's caliber tries to kill him, he can survive for 5 minutes. But he didn't like that the shield looked too sacred. He'll have other people fight, so his shield will do for now. It was rainy outside. Rock-Soo met the same kittens again. They meowed pitifully in the rain and began to rub against his legs. Rock-Soo's heart couldn't take it anymore, and he took an unusual step and overcame himself to bring the drenched kittens back to his county home. A surprised Hans asked what it was, to which Rock-Soo said it was a stupid question and handed him the kittens. Surprised, Hans exclaimed that they were very cute and adorable kittens. Hans asked to keep them, to which Rock-Soo agreed and asked to feed them, adding that they were brother and sister. The faint odor of medicines and the distinct smell of baked goods made him draw only one conclusion, that the kitten with the ashy fur was the big sister and the little brother was the ginger kitten. He gave them a sly smile. Turning to the kittens with the same smile, he said they would discuss it later. Rock-Soo decided to inquire about Ron's whereabouts, to which Hans replied. Still squeezing and enjoying the kittens, he replied that he had gone to buy things for the trip, and Bikros from the kitchen had gone with him. Hans said that they all seemed excited to be accompanying him. Rock-Soo's face immediately turned gloomy. That same evening, he returned to the library again. There he was greeted by his host. Going upstairs to his favorite spot, he told him to serve 3 cups of tea and a book he hadn't finished last time. It was still raining outside the window. Looking at all of this, Rock-Soo loudly clucked. At this point, the master had already served him tea. Looking at the librarian carefully, he remembered Choi, Han, Bikros, Ron, and Belos. Belos didn't have an important role in the first half, but pretty soon he swears his loyalty to Choi Han and shows his true ambition. He would. Though he could not reveal himself to his father or brother from the beginning, he was quite greedy. He found Belos to be a rather tiresome type, though he couldn't say he hated him for it. It was a trait that made him more human. Belos suddenly spoke of the capital and said he was probably going there after him. Rock-Soo kept remembering that Belos and was supposed to go to the capital soon to contact Choi Han. Belos noticed that he had changed, and that the nickname of the bad man didn't suit him at all. Rock-Soo suddenly decided to change the subject and said that he couldn't call his father, and his older brother, his brother. He asked Bilos if he planned to remain a bastard child, and whether he was happy with the way things were. Then I answered for him that of course he was not. Then started talking about how he's been misbehaving for about 10 years. At that time, Choi-han and Ron came straight up the stairs to them. Rock-soo continued that after 10 years, it is quite possible to give up his usual way of life, because you cannot stay a bad person forever. Bilos suddenly thumped his fist loudly on the table and ducked down, covering his face with his hand. It was uncharacteristic of his behavior. He opened his hand behind the anger and cruelty and said that he was really sick of everything. Rock-soo was glad he was right. As soon as Ron and Choi-han approached them, Bilos's face became ordinary. Then he stood up and said cheerfully that they would soon meet in the capital. With an annoyed look, Rock-soo thought it was unnecessary because he needed to contact Choi-han. Passing by Choi-han and Ron, Bilos gave them a quick and disapproving glare. Rock-soo smiled because he remembered that according to the contents of the book, Choi-han and Bilos had glimpsed each other once before the capital. Ron and Choi-han sat down right in front of him, and Rock-soo said he knew Ron would come too. Also, according to Hans, Bikros was with them. Ron spoke next. He asked if he was close to the owner of the place, and he said no, and wondered if Ron was too inquisitive for his own good. The old man's words made him nervous. Choi-han suddenly said excitedly that it looked like the rumors really weren't worth believing. A little later, Bilos brought 2 more cups of tea and clarified whether it should be served to these gentlemen. Rock-soo replied positively and said that he had pre-ordered this warm lemon tea. He ordered a special tea for Ron, explaining that he thought it was his favorite since he brought it every morning. Ron only looked at him languidly and didn't say a word, while Choi-han looked on with innocent eyes and thanked me for the tea. Then Ron picked up a cup of tea and suddenly began drinking it calmly. After that skirmish in the county, Bikros kept calling him out, and the boy, smelling of blood, answered him that he'll be a protector from now on because he can do it too. That's what Rock-soo told him. It was an unexpected answer, but in his pursuit, Ron had heard something more unexpected. It was Kale's way of saying that you can't stay a bad person forever. Ron noted to himself that things were getting interesting. These two had a relationship as comrades who trusted each other even though they were always exchanging barbs. At the birth of the character, Ron and Choi-han were bound by a pact but still had each other's backs. The situation has changed, but the character bond has not changed. Rock-soo was sorry that the change couldn't be avoided at all, but his skin was worth more than that. He didn't want to meet the book's fate. When Bilos saw the guests coming down, he stood up and asked if they were leaving. Rock-soo replied that they were, and that he would be stopping by daily in the future. Bilos added that the doors of the tea house were always open to him. Ron said with an irritable cluck that it seemed even dislike could awaken affection, to which Choi-han said he didn't want him to get so attached to him. Ron calls Kale a puppy, and remembers that he did his best to comfort his father after his mother passed away. He'd come home drunk and unconscious, but he never laid a hand on anyone. It annoys him, but he's been looking after Kale for too long. At that time, Rock-soo went outside, where the sun was shining. Ron thought that during the trip, he should tell Bikros to make their young master puppy his favorite dish. Rock-soo came home and saw the kittens he'd forgotten about. Then he remembered that Choi-han liked small animals, which was obvious the first time they met. Choi-han, who had just left, appeared in the memories and said, holding his heart, that he would go to his room to strengthen his spirit for protection. Rock-soo suddenly thought about what he planned to accomplish by becoming even stronger. Nearby, a beaming Hans offered to take a look at the kittens, which he thought were cute, adorable, and awesome. They were very lively. Rock-soo looked at them and wondered what kind of magic Hans had done to them in such a short time. The kittens mewed pitifully and looked at the young gentleman, but he had to go. Inspired by pets, Hans asked me to call him if he needed anything to do with the kittens, such as brushing or combing their fur. Ron got close to the kittens and realized they were Mao children. The kittens hissed at him unkindly, and he recognized the silver color as mist and the scarlet as poison. He went on to say that the Mao tribesmen were very intelligent and perceptive, and with proper training they could be useful. Then he reached out his hand menacingly to them, saying that he would have to leave the young master some parting gift. With a slightly angry expression, Rock-soo put his hands at his sides and looked after the kittens that had followed him. Then they started rubbing against his legs. He remembered that he had already thought of them and offered to repay them for the food. They mewed, then Rock-soo told them to answer in human language. They started saying they wanted meat and cake in human language. Then Rock-Soo said he would give them plenty of food, but asked what they would give in return. They answered in unison that they would be useful. 4 days later, Rock-Soo sat at the table with Kale's family. Dad's talking about leaving today, but he doesn't seem worried at all. He had no worries, because according to the book, he was supposed to be beaten to a pulp by Choi Han last night. However, no one touched him last night, and now he had a shield, and he could feel that protection all the time. Even if someone like Ron or Bycross decides to do something to him, he'll definitely get away with it once. Rock-Soo reminded his father that he had asked for fewer chaperones, but he had only increased them. The stepmother stepped in and said it was her call, explaining that you can't have someone decide they don't have enough people just because they don't want to bring many more, and added that it's not that there's anything wrong with him, it's that aristocrats care more about how they look than anything else. He'd heard that Valent was the eldest daughter of a penniless baron who dreamed of the heights. Back then, many aristocrats were in the business of buying and selling luxury goods, and came to the lands of Henedus and became interested in sculptures. Then she met Count Dareth and fell in love. Now, he's an important figure in the culture business. She's extremely confident, and another thing she's proud of is the family she's now a part of. So it's no wonder she's pushing for more chaperones, even though it might make him feel better. But soon, they may encounter an angry, mad dragon. No one knows how many people may be hurt if he is not stopped in time. He doesn't care about the rest of us, but he doesn't want to be responsible for those who get hurt. Since childhood, he has been responsible for his own life, so he knows that the worst and hardest time is being responsible for the lives of others. Then Rock-Soo said with a smile that art is the mirror of the soul. A sculpture is not made to please the eyes of others, but to put your soul into it. He said he read it on the memorial. The memorial says that appearance is the most important thing for every aspiring sculptor in our lands. These are words Violan has graven personally. After which, Valen told him to do as he pleased with his escorts. But in return, the carriage and everything else must be of the highest caliber. That's the way it is in their family. Rock-Soo said to prepare all the expensive things. Then one of the servants said that there would be a carriage so that no part of his body would be hurt on the bumpy road. Dareth coughed a little and asked Kale if he had looked at the papers on the heirs of each family. He replied that it was entertaining, and among them are narrow-minded people, smart and frighteningly stupid people, and incredibly power-hungry people. My father said he had read everything carefully and told me to do as he saw fit. But suddenly he started talking about the ogre tree and how they say it's gotten lighter and its leaves have changed and turned green. And where nothing had grown before, grass had sprung up. Dareth noted that this was a curious rumor. The feudal Dareth could not know that he went to the slums, but he cannot know about everything, nor can he know about the ancient power. He just concluded that Kale had something to do with the tree metamorphosis. To this, Rock-Soo replied that it's really an interesting rumor, and nothing really. Then Dareth warned him that whatever he did, rumors were his worst enemy, and that human eyes and mouths were dangerous weapons, and added that as long as it happens in his lands, he has no fear. He thought that only in these lands he would have a quiet and peaceful life and would soon return from the capital and start enjoying his existence. Dareth still had things to do, so they decided to say goodbye in the hallway. Suddenly, Kayla's brother and sister bowed slightly and wished him a good journey. Then he retorted by telling his little sister to take care of herself, and after that she got very embarrassed. Then he went straight down to the darling sleek white carriage prepared for him. When he opened the door, he saw something that made him very angry. On a specially prepared cushion in the carriage slept sweetly the very same 2 kittens. Then he resented the fact that how come these kids' place is better than his. Then Hans stood up for them and said that shouldn't the kittens be able to ride in comfort because they are their little and tender children. Then he thought about the fact that if Hans had known that these kids could create fog and release poison, he wouldn't have acted like this. Ron came up from behind and said he'd sit with the coachman. Then Choi Han came up behind him and asked if he should ride in the same carriage with him, to which Rock-Soo said he didn't have to. He thought that still his gaze was full of rage and desire for revenge, but he no longer looked broken and doomed. His condition now was more like one in which he held a grudge in his heart, but outwardly calmed down. It had been so in the beginning. Rock-Soo thought it wasn't bad, and suddenly saw the vice captain telling Choi Han that he didn't belong here. Then he came over and sucked up and asked if it was time to go. Rock-Soo only looked at him disapprovingly, quickly slammed the door in front of him and told him to go. The horses leading the carriage clattered their hooves ringingly through the woods and began to cross the bridge. Looking out the window, Roxu contemplated whether to order Hans to take care of the gifts for Kale's brother and sister, because I asked them to bring something from the capital. Then my little sister didn't pass up the opportunity and asked me to bring her a sword. Basson reminded him that his little sister dreams of mastering the art of the sword. Then he wondered if the family had long arms and legs and balanced bodies. Lily is only 7, but she is noticeably taller than her peers. With the proper dedication, she could become a gifted swordswoman. Then he said it suited her, and he'd buy her a more expensive sword. She squealed with joy. Basson asked me to bring him a fountain pen. Suddenly they stopped abruptly, so that the kittens jumped in surprise, and Roxu looked out the window excitedly. A crowd of what looked like some kind of dangerous group suddenly appeared in front of them. The woman yelled at them that if they wanted to go over that mountain, they had to pay with everything they had. Then Roxu thought that, as a fantasy adventure without mountain bandits, and said irritably that they could not see his crest. The kittens made a gloomy look, agreed with him, and said that they were fools and amateurs. Ron told the young gentleman that they would rest for a while and go on, saying that there were many rabbits. But these rabbits were different from the ones he wanted to catch for him. He added with a chuckle that, of course, he wouldn't be the one to catch the rabbits. Roxu thought that the brigands were not the scariest guys here, hinting at Ron, and coughed, and said they had half a day to spare, adding that after another quarter of a day, they would reach the village with the black dragon. He was served rabbit meat soup for lunch. He was disappointed because it wasn't even Ron who was hunting them, but Choi Han. Nearby, Choi Han was also eating soup. Roxu was indignant as to why he had brought the rabbit in the first place. The kittens jumped at his feet, saying that if he didn't like it, he could give the food to them. Then they were called in by good-natured Hans to eat beef jerky without any salt or seasoning. His guards had to face dozens of mountain bandits today. And the most capable and invincible, of course, was Choi Han. The battle ended quickly before it could even begin. Choi Han dealt with all the bandits by himself. Looking at all of this, Roxu thought that he could even finish off the Count's son, and there was no one who could ignore him forever. Ron politely inquired why Roxu had eaten so little soup. Then Choi Han asked if his stomach hurt. Roxu said no, and thought to himself that if he hadn't brought the rabbit, he would have eaten it all. Then he noticed Choi Han's gaze on him and asked what he was looking at. He asked if it was his first fight, and Roxu said it was. He had never seen such a large number of mountain brigands before. Choi Han said that it was the first time he had to be in a life-threatening situation. Roxu only grinned at him and thought to himself that he didn't even know how many nerve cells he had ruined because of him. And not just him, but the old man who laughed at the sight of the rabbit you caught, and the guy sharpening his knife next to him. In such an environment, he seemed to be terrified every second of the day. And again, he lost his appetite. Choi Han suddenly ran up and started saying that the first time was always hard, and then asked if he had ever practiced martial arts. And then he started saying he should learn self-defense. Roxu only questioningly said why and indicated that he had guards to protect him, and added that he trusted his heart so he wouldn't die. Satisfied with himself in the end, he thought his heart was protected, though, of course, he better still avoid Choi Han's monsters. After that, the kittens came to him again, and Choi Han went to train, saying that he needed to get even stronger. At that moment, Roxu thought that if he got any stronger, he would one day blow the whole planet to hell. Bikros soon brought him another meal that he clearly liked a little better than the rabbit soup. Along with Bikros came Ron, who advised that if you don't have an appetite, you should drink something sour like lemonade. Then he heard the vice captain shouting that if they were done eating, they should go to training. It was the third day on the way to the capital through forests, mountains, and bridges over rivers. Roxu thought about the fact that there was going to be an explosion of dragon mana in 3 days. These lands were the property of the Viscounty near the county of Henitus. A country house stood at the foot of the mountains to the right of the village, belonging to the Viscount. A black dragon was imprisoned in a cave under a mountain near this villa, even though the villa is called the property of the Viscount. The Viscount himself is nothing but the Marquis of Wall's mutt. Bennion is the second son of the Marquis of the House of Wall, who took over the family by making his older brother an invalid. If he hadn't tortured the dragon for fun, something so dangerous wouldn't have happened. Hans saw that the young master was quite tired and said that he and Mr. Choi Han would find an inn. They left to talk, and Roxu asked Choi Han to come back quickly. Choi Han reacted happily and said he would hurry up. He was embarrassed by such a strong reaction. He felt as uncomfortable as if he'd taken a poisoned apple from someone's sweaty hands. At last, they entered the settlement, but suddenly a carriage appeared, rushing straight at the old man crossing the road. Choi Han ran up lightning fast and grabbed the old man and saved him from possible death. He grabbed it and quickly carried it in front of the speeding carriage, to which Roxu thought it was a cliché. He got out of the carriage with a sigh and went to talk to the vice captain himself, despite the indignant cries of the vice captain. Before him was a typical overbearing aristocrat named Benyon Sten, and a typical villain from the book Birth of a Hero. Benyon's escort started to get indignant about how Choi Han dares to block the way of such dignitaries, to which the man indignantly started shouting that a man was almost hurt and that he was bad at driving his crew. The attendant replied that commoners must give way to noblemen's carriages. Adding that it was all the fault of this commoner's shallowness, she glared menacingly in his direction. And then Benyon came over to her and took her by the shoulder and told her to stop. Hans and Roxu were standing next to each other when Hans noticed that Choi Han was very angry and made a grimace. Then just as Benyon approached his escort, Choi Han took his shoulder and told him to stop. And he started yelling that they could have gone around, but they didn't, and it's impossible to turn a blind eye. After he told Choi Han to calm down again, he noticed a blood-stained sleeve on Benyon's sleeve and thought it was the blood of the tortured dragon. Benyon suddenly said he was glad to meet them and asked if they were from Henedis County. He obviously knew who Kale was. He replied that he was right and called him by his full name at the same time, thinking he was a crazy person. Benyon went on to say that he had only heard stories that there was a somewhat promiscuous young man in the county behaving inappropriately for a nobleman, then clarified whether the young Basin Hennetus had been coming to the events since the year before last instead of him. To which Roxu replied that he was this bad man of the worst and most glorified. Benyon pointed out that he was pretty interesting. He went on to say that he was unintentionally delayed by the interference, but now thinks it's not so bad since he was able to meet him. But the servant he had Choi Han under should be taught a lesson on how to identify people who have the right to go wherever they want. At this moment, Choi Han was already boiling with rage at his words. They were interrupted by an old man who fell to the ground, bowing and asking for forgiveness. Depending on what territory they live in, the peasant's situation varies greatly. The viscount of these lands was the lapdog of the Marquis of Wall. Took over his character, so he's definitely just as arrogant and bossy. Whether or not Benyon gets beaten up by Choi Han is none of his business, but as long as Choi Han is in his company, he can't be publicly beaten by an aristocrat. Then touching the old man's shoulder, Roxu asked him where the bar was. He needed a decent drink because he couldn't get a good night's sleep without a nightcap. Then turning back to Benyon, he mouthed that he was glad to meet them anyway and held out his hand. He looked at him contemptuously, taking his time to shake his hand. Then the attendant coughed and said they were already a little late, but Benyon cut her off and told her to stay out of the aristocrat's conversations. He barely shook my hand and said he had business to attend to, so he'd be leaving. Roxu offered to have a drink if they met in the capital and added that he was an incredible man, judging from their acquaintance. And also, the head of the Marquis of Sten is really only worthy of him. To which the latter replied that he was also a nice and simple man, and they would definitely meet again. After their carriage left, Roxu thought it was unlikely, and even if she saw him somewhere, she would try to stay away from him. Then he put his hand on Choi Han's shoulder and said that half of the aristocrats are like that. Then sat down to the old man and asked him why he was sitting and not getting up, assuming that he had hurt his leg. He turned to Choi Han and said that since he had saved the old man, he should take him home. But the old man said it was okay, and he would take them to the bar. But Roxu objected and said he wasn't in the mood for a drink. To which the old man said they serve alcohol and he runs the only inn in the village, adding that there's a bar and a tavern. Then he thought he was the only one. He couldn't find a better place anyway, so he asked Hans for directions. Then Choi Han came up to him and asked him if he was mad at him. To which Roxu fiercely mouthed what he should be angry about and started listing reasons. Then cited the question of why the old man should apologize to him and he should be the one to ask for forgiveness. After a bit of thought, he concluded that it wasn't his place to say that, even though he didn't want to and he wasn't angry. He could say something that Choi Han usually says. He used to want to, but it's different now. In this pattern of behavior is the whole essence of life that he has learned, namely, to carefully seek compromise with authority and calmly accept other people's irrationality. And somewhere in the midst of that, live the life he wants to live. In addition, if someone bullies him or stresses him out, he is obliged to return the favor. Then he said that this bad man would probably be kicked out of the family soon. Then he said a surprise line about stealing his dragon. They soon found themselves in the inn of an old man who gave him the best room, adding that it was the first time an aristocrat had stayed with them. Then offered to make himself comfortable and said to tell him if you needed anything. Rock-Soo thought to himself that it was good that he had frosted himself appropriately, but this excessive hospitality made him tense. He didn't like his robo-tree. His inn couldn't be bad since they were staying here. Then the old man asked the unexpected question of whether there were many good men like him in the lands of Henitus. Laughing, he replied that it was nonsense, and said he was the worst of the worst in their land, and that everyone there was much better off than he was. The old man sighed involuntarily, after Rock-Soo waved his hand and told him to go to work. The old man bowed 90 degrees and left. After a while, he heard a knock on his door. It was Hans. He brought a small wooden chest that Rock-Soo told him to bring. Rock-Soo noticed that Hans was very curious about the contents of the box, to which Rock-Soo replied that it is not customary for a butler to hide his emotions. Hans said that one of the most important rules was to keep nothing from the master. Then Rock-Soo told him to go out and take care of everything, since they would be here for 3 days. He sat down on the bed and thought that, unlike Ron, Hans was the least of his worries. He was surprised by the trip, but he wasn't causing any trouble. At that time, the kittens were fussing and staring at the box with curiosity, saying that they were very curious about what was inside. Rock-Soo replied that what's in it is what will help save the poor creature and leave one lout with a nose. With a charming smile, he added that here was something that would keep him out of harm's way. A picture flashed in his mind of sitting before Belos in his tea room. They talked about the value of the thing he was going to rent from Belos. But Belos warned that there were 2 items that could not be rented to outsiders, so he would put them in his name. He said to meet him in the capital and give them to him in person. He pulled a balloon out of the box. In his hand lay a dark ball that was a device for disrupting mana flows. When he told the kittens that the balloon was worth hundreds of millions of gallons, they were very surprised. But he paid Belos 20 million gallons for the lease. It will break all the magical surveillance devices on the mountain, but it must be set up in advance and will work for 40 minutes. It's pretty expensive for one balloon, but what he doesn't like most is that it's incredibly durable and won't collapse so easily. Then Rock-Soo asked the kittens if they could read the map, and they said of course they could, because they were heirs of the Meow Mist tribe. Then he unfolded a map in front of them, the same map he had shown Choi Han before he left. Then pointed to the village where they were now, and said that if you went east from that village to the mountain, you could see the villa. Also warned them not to go near her as they might be spotted. There's a cave behind the villa, and they'll free the kid who's being tortured there. This kid is even younger than Hong. Hong got excited and said that means they will rescue him, to which Choi Han laughed and said that they will just rescue him. So they need to go there now in their cat form and discreetly bury the balloons somewhere on the mountain. The kittens started asking questions, and Rock-Soo told them that the stone should be buried anywhere on the mountain. After tying the stone around their necks, the kittens said it was easy, because they even managed to outrun the elders of the tribe as they ran away. Rock-Soo replied that they could easily handle it because if they couldn't, he wouldn't have assigned them such a task. When they come back, he will give them as much beef as they want. When the kittens heard this, they stretched out their faces and imagined the deliciousness. Then they jumped out the window and raced off to do their job. As he drank another mug of lemonade, Rock-Soo thought he was getting used to the taste. Choi Han, who was sitting next to him, asked if he needed help. Then he asked if Choi Han had ever seen dragons. The man looked him in the eye and said he'd seen something similar once. Choi Han thought it must be one of the dragon-like monster species of the Forest of Darkness and asked what it was like. He replied that he looked like a monster and was as violent as a monster. Rock-Soo replied that this monster wasn't even close to looking like a dragon back then, and went on to say that dragons were like humans. Dragons, werewolves, dwarves, elves, they were all like humans and had minds and feelings. But if such a creature has been in darkness since birth, unable even to realize itself and never having seen light but torches, you can imagine what it could become. It stops hearing the voice of reason. With no family, it suffers from loneliness. With no hope of support, it struggles to survive each day of endless torture and abuse. Choi Han lowered his eyes. They expressed anger and resentment for the animal in question. Rock-Soo had anticipated such a reaction, because this gentleman couldn't help but get angry over such a story. Then he added that a similar creature was in the neighborhood. Choi Han was so angry at the tortured dragon that a dark aura appeared around him. Choi Han then asked if he was going to rescue and tame him. A dragon who's been tortured all his life by humans is unlikely to say he should be taken away. He's clearly full of hatred and mistrust of humans. So Roxu replied that Choi Han is crazy and he's not going to tame him. He had heard that dragons subconsciously consider themselves superior to all creatures, including humans, and are quite arrogant. And even if he raises a dragon, he feels like he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Raising one of the dragons, of which there are no more than 20 left on the eastern and western continent, is a pretty bad idea. Then explained to Choi Han that dragons should live free, to which Choi Han agreed. He stood up from the table and asked Choi Han to help in this rescue, and he stood up in a fighting stance and agreed enthusiastically. Roxu added that he would prefer to avoid killing if possible. He needed to keep things as quiet as possible. Then he cut the conversation short and told Choi Han to ask Ron to set up a table with alcohol and snacks on the first floor. Then Roxu started drinking alcohol, which made his whole face turn red. Choi Han asked Hans if it was okay that he was drinking so much, to which he replied that his hands were empty, so they were safe. Roxu approached the old man and praised his drink, to which he replied that their alcohol was made from herbs and berries that grew only in their lands. So the price is a little high. He asked about the amount of alcohol, and when he was sure there was plenty, he told all his companions to pour it. The vice captain said it was unnecessary, but Roxu cut him off and said it was in order. Then he called Choi Han and asked him to hold him, saying he was going to sleep. The vice captain ran up to help too, but Roxu only waved him off, telling him to rest and the other knights too. There was nothing to threaten them here, but he felt sorry for the guys who were on night watch tonight, but those who were free should have fun and rest. Choi Han then took Roxu to his quarters. On the way, they met Ron. Though the old man didn't care about his plans, he wouldn't have liked anything annoying, so he decided to warn him in advance. He told Hans and Ron that he was going to sleep and that they shouldn't wake him up unless it was an emergency. To which Hans wished him a good night's rest, and Ron said he'd be in the neighborhood. Afterward, he told Choi Han to let him go and that he should leave too, and whispered to him to come in through the window after sundown. After a while, when it was getting dark and the sun was setting, Choi Han climbed into his room through the window. He saw Roxu already on his feet and dressed in the clothes of a secret group. He threw him the exact same outfit. The Birth of a Hero had a detailed description of their clothes. Maybe because they kept running into the main character Choi Han, he specifically ordered it based on this description. The clothes were a little sloppy, but from a distance they looked believable. In any case, people only remembered their symbol, the star pattern. Choi Han asked if they were doing something bad, to which he said yes. Then he too asked for a mask. No matter how kind a man is, if he has an object of hatred, he's bound to want to teach him a lesson. Especially a 17-year-old guy who's had to live alone for a long time and has barely come out into the world. Pointing at the kittens, Roxu explained that they were the children of the Meow tribe of the werewolf tribe. Then he introduced them to each other by saying Choi Han's name and the names of the children. Their names were On and Hong. In the forest, Roxu glanced at his watch and announced that it was time to move on. They all ran through the woods together, keeping pace with each other. The voice changer was functioning normally. Because their magical devices signaled a malfunction, it was working. And based on how little he heard that squeak, not all of the fixtures there were high-end. At this moment, Choi Han had already started fighting with the guards who were puzzled. After he killed a few guards, they encountered another group of guards. Then Roxu said the word fog, and immediately the fog that he released appeared around them all. Roxu asked Choi Han to cover him. One of the guards ordered the others to stop them. Choi Han accomplished his goal of taking down 2 men in a split second. The surprised guard realized that the swordmaster was in front of him and asked what they wanted, but Choi Han told him to shut up. Roxu ran into the tunnel and shouted to Choi Han that he was counting on him, to which he replied, full of rage and determination, that no one would go in there. At the time, Benyon was standing in the dungeon and didn't understand why his crystal ball wasn't working. When he saw the unknown person in front of him, he shouted fearfully not to approach because he didn't even know what was here. Benyon said in the book that in preparation for the invaders, he booby-trapped the torture room. Roxu thought that if she exploded with this cave, he would explode too. Then Hong released the poison on Benyon and he fell at his feet, choking to death. After which, Roxu reached into his pocket and pulled out the key to the torture room. Then they went into this room and saw a little sleeping dragon covered in scars. In this dungeon, Roxu could smell the dragon's blood everywhere. He opened the cage, looked at the dragon, and said it was time to go. After a moment, he opened his wide blue eyes. Suddenly, the kitten said it was time to go because Benian could wake up at any moment, so he took the baby in his arms and took it out of the cage. He looked like he was in a lot of pain. The dragon looked unkindly at the kittens and grinned. Either way, he planned to use the healing potion, but first, he needed to get rid of the mana control ball around his neck. Only then the potion would work properly. The dragonkin was still staring at them in disbelief and grinning. Somewhere in the dungeon, there must be a secret passage for Benian's escape. It was written that Benian was very afraid of an attack from the outside, so she made an escape tunnel, a secret passage unknown even to his servants. The wall should be particularly smooth compared to the rest of the wall. The secret passage was right behind her. He found it. If he hit it hard enough, he could get out. Choi Han finished his business of letting the servants escape, and the armed men knocked out, and returned to see the dragon and Benian lying on the floor. After listening to his story, Roxu told him to slam his fist into the wall with all his might, without destroying the whole cave. He had to strike as if he wanted to break a wall 10 centimeters thick. A completely impossible punch for Roxu was considered a low blow for him. His powerful blow created a man-sized hole in the wall. Then Choi Han followed into the cave, followed by the surprised kittens and Roxu carrying the dragon in his arms. Soon, they were outside, and the dragon opened his surprised eyes, for he had never been out in the wild. The dragon looked at him angrily, clearly not realizing that he was being wished well. He was very rebellious, even though Benian had tortured him brutally for 4 years. He personally liked that dragon. Kim Roxu, growing up as an orphan in a harsh world, just gave up. He was different from his past. Then, he took out a pair of wire cutters and grabbed the dragon's collar and cut off the collar that was holding back his mana. The collar was still energized, so he gave Choi Han gloves and told him to take the collar. While the dragonkin squinted unkindly at Roxu, clearly not understanding what was going on, Roxu took out a jar of red liquid that was a healing potion for the dragonkin, then walked over to him, and then he took the dragon by the snout. The dragon was very frightened by his actions, remembering that this was the only way they'd ever grab his face before they hurt him. But surprisingly, there was no pain or abuse after this action. Roxu gently began to drink the potion, with a furtive tenderness, telling him to get well soon. Suddenly, the dragon felt stronger. He began to glow. His tail glowed especially brightly. Then Roxu asked the dragon what he planned to do now that he was the smartest and proudest dragon in the world. He knew he was speaking human. When he asked what he would do with freedom, he said he would run away and didn't want to be tamed. Roxu said he was a dragon and had the right to do so. Suddenly, the dragon roared and, not believing Roxu's words, exclaimed that it was all lies. When he said that people only lie, Roxu replied that he can lie too, but even so, he can live his life as he wants. Finally, Roxu said he was free to go and turned around to leave, thinking that was enough. They freed the dragons safely, and they defended Benian and the village. And now, thanks to the dragon, Choi Han has realized the meaning of freedom. Besides, the dragon won't follow them, so everything worked out perfectly. The dragon was still sitting in the same place, saying that he hated humans because they were all bad. The kittens jumped for joy, thinking the dragon was following them, thinking they had a little brother, to which Roxu said it was nonsense, because dragons are freedom-loving creatures. That instinct will never allow them to bond with humans, and this little guy was tortured. That's why he hates people. The kittens replied that apparently they wouldn't have a little brother. Walking forward a little, he told the kittens to dig up and bring him the balloon. Today was the first time Choi Han saved someone. He had fought with the mountain bandits before, but it was more to protect than to save. He said that the plot has changed a bit because Choi Han saved the dragon instead of the village. Choi Han then asked what he would do if the dragon wanted to follow him. This question took Roxu by surprise. He said it wasn't going to happen, but he thought about it anyway. He finally replied that he didn't want to think about the past and didn't want to waste time guessing. Returning home, he lay down on his bed and fell asleep immediately after all his adventures, leaving the window open. But he wasn't alone in the room. The same rescued dragon was lying on the window frame, holding an empty potion jar in his paws. It was morning. Roxu and Choi Han sat at the table across from each other. Roxu had been out of it yesterday, and now that the excitement was gone, he was feeling very hungover. He hadn't been able to sleep because of the feeling of being stared at. Then he asked Choi Han if he had finished with the rest, to which he replied that he had erased all their tracks and left others leading west. After Choi Han said they would reach the city in a few days, he asked if this was the middle of the road he was talking about. Rock-soo replied that he did. Their next destination is Parcel City. That's where they'll split up. Until now, they had been traveling for so long because they had to pass through mountains all the time, but now the road all the way to the capital was good, and they would get there quickly. Choi Han suddenly admitted that he was actually going back to check on the Viscount's villa, and a group of knights left, to which Rock-soo replied that they had probably gone to report what had happened. Then he told another curious thing. The secret passage from the cave through which they had escaped had been undermined, and not only it, but also the plants and trees. To which Rock-soo replied that the dragon did it, adding that it's a good thing the unconscious people there didn't get killed. The dragon is still small, so it's afraid and hiding. He blew up the passageway, worried someone might follow his trail, and destroyed the neighborhood to destroy the magical machines. Dragons are very sensitive to mana, but he's pretty smart for a 4-year-old. Choi Han began to say that he felt that his mana power was incredible. But Rock-soo cut him off and said that he was insulting the dragon by thinking him small and underestimating him, and told him to leave. He said he went to help Bikros. Rock-soo thought they were finally getting along, but Choi Han said they didn't get along at all. It was the first time he'd ever seen that strange, slightly nervous expression on his face. Lastly, he asked Choi Han if he saw Hans to tell him to prepare a table with alcohol and snacks. Then they started to go down the stairs, but suddenly Choi Han froze. In front of them was the knight he knocked out yesterday while rescuing the dragon. He was a little frightened because it seemed to him that he had put in a blow of such force that he should not have recovered for about 24 hours, but he came to his senses sooner. Choi Han clearly underestimated him and decided that he would hit him with more force in the future, as you'd expect from a protagonist who's fighting his way to justice at any cost. The old man brought him the alcohol he drank last night, to which Rock-soo said the more he looks at it, the more he thinks. About being a good salesman, it was a compliment. The old man brought the perfect drink for his morning hangover. The irritated vice captain was telling the Viscount's guard that he didn't understand why he needed to know what they were doing last night, to which the guard replied that a thief had broken into the Viscount's villa yesterday and stolen a few things. He just wanted to make sure that they had been spared that fate. Banging the bottle loudly on the table, Rock-soo asked them what they were staring at. Then the vice captain began to explain that the gentleman could not wake up completely without a drink this morning, and he needed a hangover after last night. After his words, the guard said that he was a busy gentleman and started to leave, while Rock-soo thought that a little bit of his suspicions they should ease. Now that he's seen how stupid he is, he's not going to think Kale could pull off a heist like that. No one would consider it normal for a nobleman's offspring to drink his way into the ruling family. Perhaps when Benyon finds out what happened. Then Rock-soo asked Ron to serve him tea with lemon and honey, explaining that it seemed to really help with the hangover. Even if word gets out on the trail they left behind, they won't find anything. Rock-soo reflected that somewhere around this time, Benyon must be just out of his mind with rage. Though Taylor Wall of the Marquis of Winkins was known for his sharp wit. Once he was paralyzed from the neck down, with the help of his brother Benyon, he was a goner. The poor man had read all sorts of books just to get the power that would help him heal, but there was no record of such a power. And then, in a moment of desperation, Taylor managed to find a small clue in a bookstore: Rebirth and the Stone Obelisk. Only these 2 words he was able to decipher from the text of a thick, ancient book. They hardly sounded like a clue, but Taylor immediately headed for the place the words pointed to. On the road, the kittens asked if today was the day to take a break, to which Rock-soo replied that from today on, they would be taking breaks. If he wanted to get to the parcel in peace, he only had to follow a strict schedule. He had to visit this city, for somewhere there was hidden an ancient power, similar to his indestructible shield. It was the energy of the heart. The power Taylor was searching for was there. If Rock-soo could get his hands on her, his shield would be stronger. He was ashamed to deprive Taylor of his last hope, but this power was more important to him. Taylor knows it is a power of recovery and vitality, but he doesn't know that it won't help with injuries sustained prior to its acquisition. Eventually, after gaining her powers, Taylor will despair when she finds out the truth, and his hard-won strength won't help him escape Benyon. Hans told the kittens that if they make a wish at the stone obelisk, it will come true, so they asked to go with Rock-soo. He decided to ask them what they wanted to wish for. They said they wanted their brother to be with them. Rock-soo flatly refused. Evening was approaching. The sky had darkened, and they decided to make a halt tonight. In the morning, they saw the carcass of a deer. There was a scribble next to it. Judging from the scribble, whoever had left it knew the language but couldn't write. Rock-Soo was disturbed. Choi-Han pretended not to know who it was, even though he was the one on night watch. Rock-Soo decided to pretend that he still didn't understand anything about who it could be. But the dragon brought various animals to all the subsequent rest stops. Rock-Soo hoped that he would give up if he continued to play dumb. As he sat down, he thought it was terrible and hoped he wouldn't follow them all the way to the palace. Choi-Han thought it was cute because the dragon had not yet lost its childlike purity. Rock-Soo exhaled irritably, remembering that the dragon claimed to hate humans. He had thought that the dragon would grow in strength and destroy the Marquis of Sten. If he had done so, the peace of the Hennetis lands would have lasted much longer. The kittens fixed their admiring gazes on Posey's huts because they were all made of stone obelisk. Choi-Han held the kittens by the window so they could see everything. Then they picked a place to stay. Han said it was the lull before the stone obelisk festival, so the prices were low. At this, Rock-Soo remarked that there weren't many stones in this region, and it wasn't clear why there were so many obelisks. Then Han said it was a long story, sad but instructive, and began to tell it. He said excitedly that this story was about ancient times. Long ago, this town was abandoned by God, the abandoned town of Parcel. Rock-Soo said he hadn't heard of it before, to which Hans replied that it was because he hadn't studied history. These words made him a little angry, but Hans reminded him that one of the most important duties of a butler is to tell his master what he doesn't know. Hans didn't know what caused this city to be abandoned by God once upon a time. But then the townspeople began to build stone obelisks together. It is said that this is how they wanted to convey their prayers and wishes to God. But their wishes did not come true, and none of their prayers worked. That is why there are no temples in Posili. Anyway, here, instead of temples, there were stone obelisks, and from that time on they became a symbolic promise. By promising each other and themselves that the man who gets what he wants will destroy his obelisk. Rock-Soo found this town interesting, and Hans agreed, adding that one should always achieve one's desires by one's own efforts. So the destruction of the stone obelisk marks a kind of victory. Then Rock-Soo realized that the inhabitants were not building them because of their trust in God, but to make a promise to themselves, so it was pointless to make a wish. Hans noted that it was certainly sad to be left behind, but the story of these townspeople was very motivating. Hans suddenly saw kittens under his feet who were angry that he had tricked them into making a wish at the obelisk. Hans tried to remedy the situation by offering to bring them some beef jerky, but it didn't help. Hans finally decided to bring them something tasty to make up for it. Then Rock-Soo told Ron to leave too, but he decided to check if Choi-Han would really be leaving in 2 days. Then Rock-Soo suggested that he go with Choi-Han, to which Ron smiled and said he couldn't leave his master. Besides, he thought it was better for them to go with Mr. Choi-Han and added that Bikros would be upset. Rock-Soo replied to him that they would be able to catch up in the capital city, and this separation wouldn't be long in the end. Then with such a good relationship, they'll go to Rosalind's kingdom. He thought it was great, though not so great for him personally. Then Ron said with a smile on his face that he looked forward to their reunion. All he wanted was for everyone to get to the capital safely. Putting his hand to his face, he thought he didn't. He did not believe it, for he was not one to be impatient or to wish for a safe arrival. Then he told Ron to leave as well. He bowed and left the room. After he left, the kittens cried and said that Hans was a real liar because he had deceived them about the wish, and they had believed him. The power left behind by an ancient man who died of old age is heart energy. It is said that this man lived to be 150 years old, but he considered his power to be a curse. Rock-Soo opened the door with a start and surprised Hans. He offered to go to see the stone obelisk, suggesting that he go with Choi-Han, only taking Ona and Hong. This long-lived man wanted to build a stone obelisk at the place where wishes are collected. That's where Rock-Soo needed to go. He spent over 100 years trying to build it, but he never did. There was no telling what he so ardently desired. His desires certainly didn't concern Rock-Soo, but right now he wanted to inspect that obelisk beforehand. If he was going to do that, he had to make it perfect. They went out there in the afternoon, so now the sun was blazing outside. As they walked toward the obelisk, Rock-Soo covered his face with his hand from the sun and noticed the man sitting in the wheelchair, confirming his thoughts that they were still here. The eldest son of the house, Stan Taylor, and the temple maiden Cage, who was holding him, appeared before him. Rock-Soo had come to make sure that this was the right place, but he decided to take a closer look at these guys just in case. He only knew a description of their appearance. Suddenly, Taylor asked Cage why she had brought him here. Cage replied that she doesn't know if God is right or if it's just a load of crap, but she has trouble sleeping several nights in a row. In her dreams, she sees this place. Suddenly there was someone who could help them, so she rushed here. God told her that he himself could not foresee much, like what that person would do in the future. Then Taylor asked if there were people that even God could not predict. She said she didn't know, but half of what he usually says is nonsense and bullshit. Then Taylor asked, that isn't the fact that he can hear the voice of God a secret. To which Cage replied that she is not being fed by God, and it is impossible to believe the sudden beneficence of their situation. After Cage suggested we go out to eat, Taylor said he had a sudden craving for a beer, and Cage was craving smoked pork. Taylor decided it was the perfect combination and they left, but in the meantime, Rock-Soo remembered their faces well. They don't know him, so it's enough for him to avoid them without running into them. Suddenly Hans muttered that it was the eldest son of the Marquis of Sten. All the information about aristocrats was stored in his head. That man was in a wheelchair, and on the wheelchair was a scarlet snake. It's the symbol of the Stan family. He just put two and two together. After Rock-Soo said that Hans is quite capable, although you can't tell from him, but Rock-Soo said to ignore Taylor. At last, they reached the stone obelisk. It was illuminated by the bright, blazing sun. When Rock-Soo saw this pile of rocks, he said it was more mediocre than he thought. Of course, he didn't expect to see a work of art, but it was so ordinary he didn't even want to know more about it. The sad kittens saw it and said it was disappointing and ugly. Suddenly, he and Hans noticed that Choi Han was heading toward the stone obelisk. Rock-Soo thought he was making a wish. Then he stood up and closed his eyes at what Rock-Soo thought was his wish to return to his homeland. He was very different from him. Choi Han is a character who grew up in a good and happy family, so he managed to survive in the most desperate situations and still be kind. He suddenly had a sudden urge to ask something, or rather borrow something from Kale. Rock-Soo was a little scared and told him to ask first, and he asked about whether he would make a wish. Wishful thinking didn't appeal to Rock-Soo because, in his opinion, wishes inflate expectations and it's easier to live without them. For example, if you rub a lottery ticket expecting to win 101 and win 501, your mood immediately improves. But if you're hoping for the grand prize and you get the same 101, you'll get depressed. After his words, Hans took him by the shoulder and noted that he was very wise and that there was no room in the world for dreams or hopes. Becoming a little annoyed, he told Hans to go and take in the sights. After Hans left, Choi Han reported to him that the dragon had followed them. He told him to pretend he didn't know. Looking away at the locals, he wondered if the little one had really followed them. After they left, a dragon appeared in the same spot, clearly chasing them. The next day, our hero decided to go to the tomb of a man who lived to be 150 years old. He loudly announced to everyone that he would only take Choi Han there, because if he said he'd take the strongest of them all, no one would follow him. He couldn't go alone because they wouldn't let him. Cheerful Hans ran off to watch the kittens like he was just waiting. When it was just the two of them, Choi Han asked if he was going to do something again today. Rock-Soo turned around and said irritably that if anyone heard, they would probably think he was doing something suspicious every day. Then he pointed to the mountain and said he had to climb it, but Choi Han could wait at the bottom. Choi Han was convenient in that respect. He didn't ask too many questions about what he was doing. Choi Han suddenly said he was leaving today, to which Rock-Soo said he told him to do so. But he went on to say he had something important to say before he left. Rock-Soo thought that he must have been talking about something other than the dragon yesterday, so he asked him what he wanted to say. He hesitated at first, but then he blurted out that Ron was a dangerous man. His words surprised Rock-Soo. He didn't think that Choi Han would tell him that directly and wondered if he should pretend or not. And he decided to just calmly react to this report from Choi Han that he already knew about. His words led to a violent reaction from the young man. He began to shout that Ron was giving off a dangerous odor of blood, and a very strong one at that. And he's obviously spilled a lot of it in his life. He had originally thought that Rock-Soo had left him behind without knowing it. If he'd known, he would have taken this strong Ron with him to save the dragon, but he didn't. So he figured Rock-Soo either didn't know about Ron's powers or didn't trust him. But there was no way he could not trust a man who had been around for 18 years. So Choi Han went for the one where he doesn't suspect Ron's strength. Choi Han thought that neither he nor the others knew about his power, so he decided to warn. He kept yelling that Ron had dark powers and resented the fact that Rock-Soo was still keeping him close to him. Rock-Soo thought to himself that as soon as they arrived in the capital, he was going to stick it to him and send him away. Then he asked a direct question about why Ron was so dangerous and why he hadn't done anything about it. After he said that, Choi-Han was about to say the reason, but he immediately stopped talking. Rock-Soo explained his silence by saying that he was doing it because Ron had done nothing wrong. Yet he'd been Kale's servant for all of his 18 years, even as he walked proudly beside the authoritative vice captain. Or when he acted as deputy butler in Hans's place, no one ever thought of being angry with him. He was loyal to his family and his role as a servant. Choi-Han reported it simply because he thought it was better to inform him that Ron might be dangerous. Choi-Han suddenly told Rock-Soo that they were both the same to him and that he and his strength were also a danger to him. They both didn't even realize that Ron was sitting on a tree branch above them, listening in on the conversation. He finished his speech by saying that Ron was just a servant to him and that he was just Choi-Han who had to pay for the food. After Rock-Soo left, Ron jumped down from the tree and said he was the young man he raised and changed diapers for. Choi-Han turned around and waved his hand irritably, reminding him that Mr. Kale had asked him not to follow him any further. He looked at Kale and said he knew, and called him a jerk. He came because he stopped the Meow Tribe kids and went with Choi-Han alone. Meanwhile, Rock-Soo climbed up the mountain and looked at the cave entrance with annoyance. He didn't think the entrance would be so small. He'd have to crawl. He squatted down frustratedly, thinking that today's choice of clothes had been a complete failure. Despite this, he still made his way inside the cave and began shaking off the dirt. Soon he felt a strong wind that he had not expected. It seemed as if this wind could break through the walls. Taylor couldn't have gotten that power without Cage's help. He decided to start his business when he heard someone's voice. It was a dragon that flew at him with a roar, screaming that he was too weak for this power. At that moment, it was as if Rock-Soo had huge white wings. A small transparent dome surrounded him. The dragonkin said he was just passing by, to which Rock-Soo gave an irritated tisk tisk. The dragon was still following him, but he's not in the mood for it right now. Every 3 hours, the strength of the wind changes. He's just getting weaker right now. He needs to get everything done before he regains his strength. The dragonkin froze in surprise, clearly not understanding what this power was. As expected, even if the wind weakened, the closer it got to the center, the stronger it got, but just pushed it back. The shield shouldn't have broken. He foresaw that he wouldn't get too far that way, so he hoped that if he gradually reduced the size of the shield, he could reduce the resistance. And it did. There was a voice from somewhere, just like when he got the shield. That voice kept saying he was sorry. Rock-Soo then thought with annoyance that the ancient power was very unstable and why Taylor was so hopeful about it. The voice called him a man with a familiar power and told him that it was a power he'd be better off avoiding. Suddenly the wind blew harder and started screaming that he had betrayed his comrades in arms. He was nothing. He was the only one who survived and lived to a ripe old age. There's no forgiveness for him. He wanted everyone to survive, but his wish would not come true, so he was never able to complete the obelisk. Rock-Soo irritatedly thought that it was very noisy here, and that crying voice didn't sound so much serious as if he was preparing to die. He was annoyed by the whining, and as he continued to wade through the wind, he noted to himself that the glutton's voice was better. The same obelisk appeared in front of him. The voice kept saying that what good was the power of rebirth if you could only save yourself with it. As he continued to make his way forward, Rock-Soo thought that the worms were quite resilient, and he just needed a force with which he could defend himself. Rock-Soo took further steps towards the obelisk. He thought for a moment that the shield might break and shrank it further, noticing that the guardians of the ancient powers were very talkative. The voice kept shouting that his heart wasn't slowing down in any way unlike his own. He was afraid of death. He was endlessly in pain and afraid of it. When the voice said that, even more, he was afraid of the end of pain that is doom, Rock-Soo took his last 5th step. Suddenly, all at once, everything was calm. The wind died down completely. The voice had already started to speak more calmly about him betraying his ideals for the sake of survival, to which Rock-Soo said that ideals are just bullshit and life comes first, and added that the obelisk looks so primitive that you don't want to build a prettier one. Then he threw the last pebble on the slide and it suddenly glowed brightly. The dragon looked surprised at this sight, absent-mindedly spreading his paws. The voice spoke again that I was going to fight them, but I didn't know the pain at the time. They didn't serve God, but I realized it when I was alone. Rock-Su listened attentively. The food that the ancient power was fed by the people of the dark forest had always been tasteless. In an effort to turn back time, he began to build an obelisk, but each time he destroyed it, despising the selfish desire for his own happiness. When he himself abandoned his own comrades, to which Rock-Su said that all men are selfish. Rock-Su was annoyed that he was talking so much for nothing. The old man's sister also talked like that, and was a great sister, a sister to all sisters. There was a crying sound. He turned to Rock-Su, saying that his boorishness reminded him of his brother, then said Rock-Su finally break everything to defeat his limit. Rock-Su smiled happily, and finally broke that obelisk without regrets. Then a brightly glowing flying ball appeared in front of him. He reached out and grabbed it and clenched it eagerly in his fist. Suddenly, the orb turned into a glowing beam that, after a moment, cut straight into his chest. With his hand to his heart, he opened his eyes wide and realized he could feel the power. Then he closed his eyes. This energy would make his shield even stronger. Now, even when wounded, his regeneration will be much faster than normal humans. When he finally made it out of the cave, he stared at the dragon that had followed him and asked if he would go with him. The dragon flew up and said that Rock-Su was weak enough to need protection, but he still hated humans. After saying that, he vanished, and Rock-Su thought he was too fickle. He looked at the grass and said he could see the dragon squashing the grass. As a result, he had more escorts. Soon, he approached Choi Han, who asked in surprise if he had rolled down the mountain, looking puzzled at Rock-Su's dirty clothes. He replied irritably that he had accidentally slipped on the way. Meanwhile, somewhere in the parcel, Cage was trashing the apartment he and Taylor were in. Taylor asked in bewilderment about what was happening to her and thought someone had decided to attack them. After his question, she asked him to wait and abruptly ran outside. Cage looked forward with crazy eyes, realizing it was true. She clutched her head, trying to hear God's voice. He told her to destroy. Taylor, meanwhile, was staring at her in bewilderment, not sure what she was talking about. Cage had hardly heard God more than once a year before. Taylor wondered why he was so interested in the stone obelisk. God told her that a turning point in their lives was happening now, and the choice should be Taylor's to add that if he wants a peaceful life, he shouldn't break. Cage looked at the obelisk in front of her and added that underneath it was the letter for which the obelisk had been erected. And yet she sensed no dangerous energy from them, then asked Taylor what he would decide. He said to collapse the obelisk. Then Cage, with a smile on his face, did so. Looking sadly at the ruined obelisk, Taylor thought he didn't know what a peaceful life was. He didn't need it. He would heal and continue on his way. He thought he was obliged to turn this bloody Marquis upside down. Whereupon he took the letter from under the ruined obelisk and began to read to himself. It said that the crown prince wields an ancient power that he doesn't need. The healing star can heal any injury, but the power is disposable. The prince doesn't need connections and resources, with which he could restrain the second and third princes. Then he exclaimed aloud that this was an interesting twist. His legs may be immobile, but his arms and head are fully functional, and he's still alive. At the end, it was said that the decision was up to him for the eldest son of the Marquis of Sten. Taylor said they'd leave the butler here and go to the capital, and thought he should have taken care of things back then, and stayed vigilant until he was disabled. They had to hurry to be in time for the reception at the Imperial Palace. Meanwhile, their conversation was overheard by the Meow children in their animal form. Taylor and Cage were glad to see the end of the conversation, and decided to hurry home, as they had a night snack for the completed task. It was the morning of the next day. Choi Han stood in the street, diligently adjusting his bag slung over his shoulder. Rock-Su soon came up to him and asked him if this was all he would take with him, to which he replied in the affirmative. To this, Rock-Su replied with annoyance and incomprehension, and turned around slightly, then pulled out and unexpectedly tossed a small brown pouch. Choi Han caught it and unwrapped it, and saw that it contained herbal healing potions and a small amount of money. After Rock-Su irritatedly asked why Choi Han had such a surprised look on his face, he turned around and waved his hand and wished him good luck. At the same time, he thought it wasn't so grandiose and saw him off in his own way. Choi Han smiled and replied happily that he understood. Finally, the vice captain proudly declared that he had trained well, so he would be the young lord's guard in the capital. Hans also wished him a good trip, after which Ron told him to go back, and Bikros, who was standing next to him, said he would sharpen his knife. At the very last moment, he said goodbye to the kittens by bending down to the ground and stroking them. The dragon from above, who was watching the scene, released a blue mana ray and directed it towards Choi Han. Choi Han said goodbye to everyone and thought that he was already in debt, but he was getting more and more, so he had to pay them back properly. A day after Choi Han left, they too left Puzzle City of Stone Obelisks and headed for the capital. The sun was already setting, so Hans announced to the young master that they would make a halt. Rock-Soo glanced at the slightly nervous kittens who were looking at each other. Then with a smile on his face, he asked if they had seen the dragon, to which he sighed, clearly giving them away. He sighed and thought about the fact that Choi Han had left and the dragon was following him. He wanted it, so he couldn't chase it away. When the vice captain noticed a man in a carriage nearby, he went to see if they could camp nearby and asked who he was. The man replied that his name was Tom, and he was a knight of the Marquis of Sten. Rock-Soo thought with horror that the carriage looked humble and had no coat of arms or banner on it, so he couldn't tell whose carriage it was. They saw the coat of arms of the county of Hennetus and decided to dare to make a request. A man suddenly appeared from the carriage and said his name was Taylor Wall. Rock-Soo's face became very annoyed, and he thought about the fact that 1 came and 3 came. And not just 3. One was a dragon that was annoying to him. The other was a temple maiden he thought was crazy, because she wished to be excommunicated. The third was a man from the Marquis of Sten. Rock-Soo sighed irritably. Then Taylor apologized for such an unexpected request and said that if they were an inconvenience, they could leave. When Taylor's lower body became paralyzed, he became a liability to others and was shunned. In other words, he was simply abandoned. After he said that, Rock-Soo said that this territory doesn't belong to him. They're both on the road, so he wouldn't be so uncivilized. Then walked over to the carriage and introduced himself and extended his hand to a surprised Taylor. Then Taylor said that because of his feet, he couldn't keep up the decorum and come out to greet him. After saying that, he shook his hand. Taylor smiled and said he was glad to meet you and introduced his companion, the temple maiden Cage, who was sitting next to him. She smiled to greet him too and wished that the peace of the night would always accompany him. Then Rock-Soo thought it was nonsense, and she's just pretending to be a good saint, and she's disgusted, so she wants to leave the church. Whereupon he laughed and said he didn't believe in God, turning on bad man mode. His words surprised them greatly. Cage thought he was throwing those words around too lightly. After Rock-Soo thought that he had to constantly fear Benyan's assassination attempt, and he couldn't count on his family to support him, because he must have spent a lot of money on magical defenses for the Posili estate, and it's unlikely he has any pennies left on his hands. He had probably read his note and was now on his way to the Crown Prince. Afterward, he told Hans to serve them food and camp near theirs, and yet not to touch him. He told them to help them as much as he saw fit. Then Hans said he would take care of them as he did. He also asked Hans to get him a drink and told Taylor he was leaving, to which he thanked him for his concern. Rock-Soo only made the decision to take care of him because he doesn't want to mess with him personally anymore. They only had 1 night, so he told the vice captain to help them with the night watch. Then he reached his carriage and saw the screaming kittens who were yelling that they knew them, to which Rock-Soo told them to pretend they didn't know him. Then the kittens asked if their baby brother dragon continued to follow them. Originally, Rock-Soo was just planning to take him out and told him to leave, but the dragon isn't just trying to thank him, but purposefully following them. As it happened, he decided that the dragon could be of use to him, for this outstanding creature had a special affinity for mana and strength. This power Rosalind could only dream of, and with that in mind, he said he'd find him a job. The next morning when Rock-Soo woke up and came out, he saw Taylor and Cage upset. Hans explained that Mr. Taylor seemed to have misunderstood. Rock-Soo then asked what happened, to which Taylor said he was truly sorry for what happened. He thought he might have been tracked because he saw a boar brought in by a dragon. Then Cage started screaming that they'd sneaked out and it was impossible, and even she couldn't recognize the creature's power. Rock-Soo thought to herself that she couldn't have recognized it with this level of strength, because the dragonkin was able to discreetly drop off a huge boar and escape. After that, Rock-Soo pointed his hand at the boar and motioned for Bikros to cook the steak. With a glow of hidden joy, he said that once again they were in for some fine meat. Taylor asked, with a perplexed look, of what he meant once again. Then Rock-Soo explained to him that someone was supplying them with food on their journey, adding that the boy could not be said to be shy, but that he was unlikely to be seen by them. Taylor and Cage exhaled in relief and relaxed upon hearing his answer, and added that it meant there had been a miscommunication. Cade then said he'd heard they were heading for the capital and asked if they'd mind if they followed them. Rock-Soo knew he was coming to this and told them to do as they pleased. They couldn't have known it was him who left them that message, and his companions couldn't tell. As it happened, he might as well leave them a debt of gratitude by escorting them to the capital. They were very happy with his answer, and he thought he had more potential tools. Whereupon Taylor added that they wouldn't be long in embarrassing them only to the outskirts of the capital. At his answer, Rock-Soo thought he was pretty smart. If they went to the capital together, he might be in trouble. Taylor added that they could part ways at any time they wanted. After Rock-Soo smiled, he gestured to Hans and told him to bring food to the carriage. Cage came up to him and asked him if it was true that he didn't believe in any god. He wondered why she was asking him that again, and said it was true, to which Cage said she understood. As they began to walk away, Taylor noticed something was wrong with Cage and asked her about it, to which she replied that it was weird. She had the nasty feeling that the god of death was now stroking the back of her head sympathetically. Just like that, Kale's group of companions were quietly approaching the capital without incident, and barely 24 hours before they arrived, Cage and Taylor came to him. Smiling and holding the bottle, Taylor asked if he liked alcohol, because there were rumors that Kale, a bad man, couldn't live without alcohol for 24 hours. Taylor doubted it, for from observation and their journey together, he had concluded that he was not at all what he was said to be. For their comfort, he hid himself in the carriage all the time and took great care to treat them in the best possible manner. Taylor also noticed that his subordinates were faithfully following Kale, but more importantly, he treated them like ordinary people. Then, laughing a little, he asked if he wouldn't mind having a drink with them before they left. Rock-Soo thought that they didn't just come to have a drink with him and immediately asked directly what they wanted. Taylor thought he wasn't a bad person, and he was smart. Then Taylor got right to the point and asked him about who he saw in front of him right now. At this, Rock-Soo only sighed tiredly and threw a bag filled with coins on the table in front of them. When they saw that, they were quite surprised, and Rock-Soo said he didn't know why they were going to the capital now that they couldn't go unnoticed. But the men going into the tiger's den could only have one thing to do with the wealthy house of Hennitus. They needed money. It was evident from them that they did not have enough money, but for their secret stay in the capital, they needed it. Even if they hadn't thought of it originally, they were now facing a golden turtle. If they ask him for this favor and get his consent, they'll be on the plus side. If he refuses, he won't inform Benyon of his request. Because he hates hardship, he seemed to him a gift that did not want to be discovered. Afterwards, Taylor closed his eyes, smiled slightly, bowed his head and thanked young Mr. Kale. They were going to leave quietly at dawn, so they went in now. They had to go on their own from here. The plan was to go through the temple. But Rock-Soo replied that no later than 3 days later, Benyon or someone from the Marquisate would know about it. They had eyes and ears even in the Temple of Death. Taylor replied that he was well informed, and Cage asked if it was not a coincidence that he was so well informed about their affairs. Then Rock-Soo told them to tell their escort to stay here another day and book a room with that money. The two of them will ride in his carriage, and their escorts will enter the capital in another 24 hours. Then he gave them a magical device capable of hiding living things within a certain radius, to which Taylor asked with sadness in his eyes and bewilderment as to why he was doing so much for them without any benefit to himself. Rock-Soo thought that since he was in on it, he was obligated to help, and if Taylor became a marquis, it would save him the headache of having to deal with the Wall family, so that peace and tranquility would continue in the lands of Hennitus, and he would live well, but all he said out loud was that he felt sorry for them. He thought about what was going through the mind of an abandoned, paralyzed, below-the-waist eldest son who was at risk of dying at any second, about the Marquise's eldest son going out of his way to borrow money from him. It seemed utterly pathetic to him. It's true, he couldn't feel his legs at all, but his eyes, nose, mouth, hands were all alive. Then Taylor thanked me for the sympathy, but said he didn't need it. Anyway, he had one condition. It was that they forget everything that had happened here. Cage replied that they swore that they wouldn't tell anyone what had happened, reminding them that anyone who broke their oath to the god of death would die. Rock-Soo replied that he wouldn't swear, and if things got heated, he'd just lay it all out. And then Cage folded her arms and said she was starting. Blue smoke appeared around her, and the whole room took on a bluish tint. Then Cage said that she was the daughter of eternal night, and she and Taylor swore on their lives that whoever broke their vows would be in eternal darkness. Everything they talked about in that place, they'll keep it a secret for the rest of their lives. No one other than Cale Hennitus would know about this conversation. Taylor in turn confirmed this as well. After the ritual, Cage said that what they were feeling was the power of the oath, and if they broke it, he as a witness would know about it. After the vows, they decided to have a drink, and a happy Cage brought 3 glasses. Looking at her disapprovingly, he thought she was carrying those glasses around with her everywhere, and then said out loud that she really was unbelievable. She poured a drink into a glass and laughed, and asked if he thought it was strange that a god servant was drinking, to which Roxu said he didn't care. Then she cheerfully talked about whether he'd like a sister with good character, to which he said no. Taylor then asked if he wanted to get a baby brother, after which Taylor and Cage looked at each other and laughed. Then they clinked glasses. On this new moon, on this completely dark night, alcohol strengthened the bond that had formed between the 3 men. The next day, they were already on the road. They had 2 hours to drive to the main gate to the capital. Taylor asked Roxu if he was well aware of the event to be held at the royal castle. He replied that it was the first time he was attending it, but he had previously been to the meetings of the young noble lords of the Northeast. After his response, Taylor began to tell him that the event was for the king's 50th birthday. There will be a festival for the people. Taylor then noted that the man did not seem to like such events. Roxu thought about the terrorist attack coming soon. Perhaps excluding the characters in the secret group, he's the only one who knows about it. And this knowledge weighed heavily on him, but he understood all too well the fear of death. He'll try to interfere, but if he gets hurt or things get tough for him, he's out of the game. As long as he doesn't take a loss, he'll do what he can. Roxu then continued the dialogue and noted that Taylor wasn't really looking forward to this festival either. To which he smiled and replied that it was some sort of decisive test for him. Suddenly, Taylor folded his arms, carefully looked at him, and warned him that he needed to watch out for the prince. Even if he's turned away, there are still family informants available to him. The 50th anniversary celebration had been planned from the beginning, but he had heard that it was the crown prince who had requested the convocation of the young nobles. Taylor wondered how to describe him, but Roxu immediately pointed out that he was a bit of a toady. Taylor said he didn't mean it, but it was the first time he'd heard such an apt characterization. The crown prince was good at giving compliments and making you feel like someone important, in such a way that his target doesn't even realize he's being taken advantage of. For example, he singled out Choi Han as a close friend and hero. In response, Choi Han considered him for a good man who was kind even to a commoner. He didn't even realize it was being used. The word use is a pretty good definition. But the direction of that use is remarkably correct. He does not use people for his own benefit or to consolidate power, all for the sake of the kingdom and the people. Perhaps even more so since he had only recently learned this skill. The crown prince usually sucked up to him and then forced him to help him. In the end, the good-natured Choi Han and Rosalind went along with him. In any case, Taylor warned him again that the crown prince's society might become too burdensome for him. Then Roxu said he'd be quiet because he doesn't like to draw attention to himself. When he saw their stares, he said that their fears would not be realized, for after all, he too was a noble sycophant. If the crown prince meets someone like himself, he will retreat and try to avoid that person. So if he's being sycophantic and taking advantage of others, he should do the same. Cage suddenly exclaimed that the smile was to his face, and he looked like a real scoundrel, to which he replied that it was better that way than to appear benign. After a while, Roxu noticed the view of the capital city through the carriage window. The kingdom of Roan is the land of stone. If you study it in depth, you will notice that since the founding of the kingdom, many legends have been associated with stones. Among these legends is one that the land had a patron spirit like a rock. It could withstand any attack to defend this land. It is said that it was this creature that prevented the descending darkness from consuming the continent. The patron spirit stood unwavering like a rock, even as his body was crumbling. They say it's how he protected the northeastern lands that are now hurting because of this stone. But such a creature couldn't possibly exist, which is why Taylor liked the legend so much. Taylor said it was unlikely to find someone who would protect others to the point of complete self-destruction, to which Roxu agreed, and noted that this legend was definitely not to his taste, and said it was the first time he'd heard it. In The Birth of a Hero, often mentioned ancient legends and legends of various kinds, but this he did not remember, although he had read up to the 5th book. To which Taylor said he only learned about it himself when he was doing research on ancient powers and writings. After a while, he handed Taylor something glowing and told him to get ready. The vice captain knocked on his carriage and said the guards needed to check the carriage. Then Roxu kicked the door with his foot and, pretending to be drunk while holding a bottle of liquor in his hand, told them to check the carriage. The guards only looked startled at this sight and paused briefly. Then they went to the carriage and looked inside. It was empty. Only empty bottles were lying on the floor. Then they stepped back and bowed, and he pretended to be annoyed and went back into his carriage. Taylor sat there with a smile on his face, holding a medallion in his hand that completely hid their presence from the guards. The weather outside was clear. They entered the west of the capital of Huis. Then Roxu told him that Ron was aware of everything and would escort them out. They just had to follow him. Hans opened the door and said that they had arrived. Cage thanked Roxu and added that their next meeting would be happier. After getting out of the carriage and looking ahead, Roxu noted that the building was even better than he had imagined, basically as expected from the rich county of Henidus. It wasn't flashy or dazzling, but it looked much more expensive than other aristocrats' mansions. The servants lined up in a row, bowed deeply, and greeted him, adding that they were glad he had arrived. Servants stood on either side and said they would serve him to the best of their ability. With an irritated look at Hans, Roxu thought that they were overdoing it with these ceremonies, but Hans only spread his hands apart. Roxu ordered them to straighten up and told them not to overdo the etiquette, because he wouldn't intentionally pick on those who worked hard. He heard they were chosen by their mother. She said they were proud of their work and then told them to work accordingly, and added that if they needed anything, they could go to Hans. He had a lot on his mind, and Hans would do a good job. After they had gone, one of the roomers sighed and said that he had not expected young Mr. Kale to come, for it had been a headache for them. But he added that he was their master, so they should take care of him, even though he was a bad man, although he had not performed in front of them yet. All they had to do was protect him and make sure he didn't do anything stupid. Then everything would be fine. Roxu threw the letter on the table and sighed regretfully as he had to go to the Northeast meeting. Hans handed him a paper that contained a list of all the children from the noble houses who had arrived in the capital so far. Then he asked if Ron had done his job, to which Hans said yes, and then Roxu told him to go get some rest. Hans bowed and said he would definitely rest, and lastly, Roxu told him to ask for something to eat at the same time. After he left, Roxu threw the list on the couch and stood up heading for the window. Then he opened the huge doors to the balcony and told someone to come in. It turned out to be the dragon that had been chasing him so far. He placed a juicy steak in front of him and told him to eat because he was always looking for and bringing them food, but he couldn't eat. The dragon had worked hard to chase him. He looked at all this beauty in front of him with surprise, and then Hong gave him a piece and told him to eat well. Sipping his drink, Roxu thought that he should eat well because he still had a lot of work to do. Then he put his glass on the table and thought about how well it would end. In a similar mansion, with the same delicious food and a complete sense of freedom. He really wanted to enjoy these 3 points for the rest of his life. There was a loud knock on the door, and Roxu dropped his glass, which shattered on the floor. Then he thought about who it might be. Choi Han wasn't due to arrive for another 3 days. He wouldn't be in a hurry to drag an injured Lack with him. To get to the capital faster, Choi Han would have to travel at an insane speed, which was impossible. He'd given him a potion with divine powers in it, but it wouldn't work on one of God's rejected wolf kind. And the extremely cautious Rosalind wouldn't show off her high-ranking magic to teleport them. He had told Choi Han to stay at a certain hotel when he arrived in the capital, but when he opened the door, he was surprised. A panting Choi Han appeared before him, holding Lack on his shoulders. He apologized, but said he didn't know who else to turn to. They were followed by a beautiful girl with curly red hair named Rosalind. Lack of the Blue Wolf family was in bad shape. His fever was the symptom with which the first fit of rabies is accompanied. However, Roxu didn't understand why this frenzy that was only supposed to happen in a year. Choi Han then walked over and put Luck on the bed while Roxu told the excited Hans to get a drink. As he walked to the bed and looked at Lack, he thought that apparently the rabies was unstoppable. Lack was in a very bad state, and Roxu told him not to overexert himself and to close his eyes. Then he saw a picture in front of him in the forest, in which he was still very young, and his uncle was standing in front of him. He told him he was going to be okay, and then he started running off into the woods. Luck was delirious. Choi Han asked what was wrong with him, and added that the potion he'd given him wouldn't help him, because the wolf family doesn't digest potions, and healing magic doesn't work either. Choi Han didn't know what to do and shouted angrily that he had to protect him, but Roxu said to calm down, and crossing his arms with a calm expression, added that if he trusted him, he should give him the case. Rock-Soo was suddenly worried about Choi Han's behavior because he's easy to get attached to and is a kind guy. But in the original script during this period, he only opened his heart slightly and didn't trust Luck completely. The first pretender to the throne of the Kingdom of Breck was the brilliant sorceress Rosalind, who was preparing to give up her position. She is first associated with roses because of her scarlet hair, but her character is described as more suited to the sun. Suddenly, she looked fearfully at the dragonkin, shouting that it was very powerful mana. Dragons are naturally quite warm to magicians. He was interested in her, so he decided to give her a little of his mana. Rock-Soo told the dragon to sit still, and then Rosalind screamed and ran away. Then he turned his attention back to Lack. He believed that because she was cautious, she would not resort to using such high-ranking magic. But most likely, they were able to reach the capital in 3 days with Rosalind's teleportation magic. He didn't expect that, contrary to his assumptions, she would decide to demonstrate her skills. Rock-Soo then asked her if she was a magician. She answered positively. Then he asked another question about whether she knew about the rabies of the wolf family. She replied that she had read about it once, but that there was no mention of any fever or such severe pain. Then Rock-Soo said that during the first rabies, they suffer greatly and lose consciousness due to uncontrollable physical metamorphosis. After they go through it, the first time they start using rabies as a weapon. Then Rosalind said she didn't know him, but she could see how things were going, adding that Luck was just a kid. Rock-Soo told Hans to fetch a stretcher and carry the boy to the training ground in the manor's dungeon, then make sure there wasn't a soul there. After which, Rosalind put her hand on hers, looked at Rock-Soo with clear eyes, and introduced herself. Then Rock-Soo folded his arms and looked at the two of them, and calmly announced to them that they would be beaten. Because in the lineage of predators of wolves, tigers or bears, parents or siblings help with the first rabies. They have to endure the rabbit attack and protect him, so the child doesn't get hurt. You can tell by the boy that this is not his case, so there'll be mom and dad to him or a brother and sister to protect him. Luck was already lying on the floor of the dungeon. All 3 of them were looking at him. Choi Han then asked how long it would take, to which Rock-Soo replied that he was all purebred, and it would take a couple hours. Choi Han said he could handle it because he was Lack's brother, so Rock-Soo told them to go to the center and go straight to him. After a few moments, Luck began his transformation. His fingernails were claws, and his eyes were blood-colored. Choi Han and Rosalind watched in horror at this performance, clearly not expecting such a drastic change. After that, Luck rose menacingly and growled menacingly with all his might. In the meantime, the dragon had created a mana barrier around Lack, to which Rock-Soo said that he was indeed incredible. The dragon replied that he was too weak, so he had to protect him. As it happened, he casually asked the dragon to make another sound barrier. Rock-Soo thought that the dragon was rapidly progressing in the use of magic, which meant that it would become extremely useful in the future. Then he turned to Ong and Han sitting nearby. He asked them if they had ever gotten mad. They shook their heads negatively. Then he asked if any of the older ones had told them about rabies. He assumed they were purebreds too, so their first rabies would be a problem too. Heirs of the genera of wolves, tigers, bears, and whales always lose their minds more than other species at the first rabies. So it's usually these 4 clans that are considered monsters. He doesn't know much about the Meow clan himself. Then he warned them that if they thought rabies was coming and fever suddenly appeared, they should go to him at once. The kitten's eyes shone with such concern. Rock-Soo thought he should take care of it before something unpleasant happened, because he's responsible for them. Suddenly, the kitten suddenly started rubbing against Rock-Soo. Meanwhile, he genuinely didn't understand why this wolf cub was suddenly rabid out of the blue. In the Birth of a Hero story he read, Luck's first rabies was a year from now, not now. And it started because of the death of a creature named Hilaire Fendrick. The character reminded Luck of his dead uncle. The death of his uncle, who was the most important thing in his life, was a great shock to Lack. He was ready to send everything in his path to the afterlife. Meanwhile, Choi Han and Rosalind asked Lack to wake up. But he was furious at Choi Han and grabbed his sword with his teeth. Choi Han begged him to come to his senses, saying it was him Choi Han hoped he would recognize him. At the time, Rock-Soo was sitting on the sidelines saying it would have been easier to just bash his head in and knock him out. Then he told On and Han to follow the movements of this wolf boy. They were the movements of a prisoner of instinct. Unlike humans, he relied entirely on his primal strength. Rock-Soo looked at the wolf with a smile on his face and noted that this was its beauty and majesty. There was nothing scary or creepy about rabies. It only granted the greatest power. They and their tribe were different, but he wanted them to watch his movements closely and learn, so they can develop their own movements or figure out a way to bite the throat of a rabid predator like a tiger bear or a wolf. Meanwhile, Locke continued his attack. Rosalind used a magic shield against him and shouted his name. She begged him to wake up soon, saying she was his little sister, and he said she was part of his family now. Then when Choi Han saw that, he shouted at Laku to attack him so he could protect Rosalind. Lak only grinned menacingly. After that, Roxu drew the dragon's attention to the way Rosalind used her magic without harming her opponent, and told him to watch carefully as Choi Han provoked the wolf cub for defense instead of offense. Not hurting is a lot harder than hurting, but he's a dragon, so he can learn it quickly. Then he told them to observe and draw their own conclusions. Roxu thought that it had been a terrible 2 hours. He was really tired and should have brought some wine with him. After a while, Luck came to his senses and immediately apologized to his little sister. Then he collapsed exhaustedly, and Choi Han immediately ran over and lifted him up. Roxu walked over to him and happily announced that he could rest now that it was all over. Choi Han then carried the exhausted Wolfchenko back to the stretcher. After that, Roxu gave the healing potion into Rosalind's hands, and Rosalind said in surprise that the wolf bloodline does not digest potions. Then Roxu said it wasn't for luck, but for them, because they had done a good job. Rosalind thanked him. Suddenly, he walked over to the squatting Choi Han and said they needed to talk. He asked him to tell him what had happened. Choi Han started his story by saying that everything was fine before he met Rosalind. He reached the town he said he'd met, where he found a group of traders heading for the capital. There weren't many of them, only 5. When he came upon them, they were looking for 2 mercenaries to guard them. Their original guard was wounded. Rosalind was also with them. He recognized her from his earlier description. The kingdom of Breck neighbors the kingdom of Rhone on the northwestern border. Rosalind was on her way to the magical tower of the kingdom of Viper through the kingdom of Rhone, but was attacked by assassins on the way. She was saved by magic, but without finding out who wanted her dead, she decided not to return, but to look for information in the capital. She was on her way to the capital too, so Choi Han decided to get close to her. He wasn't the first to start a conversation, but as it happened, he thought it was best to be friends. Roxu said he'd better stick to his character and thought to himself that they weren't that close in the book before he met Lak. If everything had been according to the original plot, the extremely cautious Rosalind would never have approached anyone first. And Choi Han, withdrawn after the incident in the village, wouldn't even go first. It wasn't his style, but he really wanted to pay good money for the meal. The traders said they were heading to where he was supposed to meet Lak, according to him. They planned to stop at the nearest village, but something happened there. On his way up to it, he learned that the original guard had been of the wolf kind. Then he asked the traders if they would trade with the villagers. They said that was not quite true, and that they would trade with the mountain village. Then Choi Han thought that if he followed the villagers of this mountain village, he might meet Lak. But that night, something terrible happened that shook Choi Han. While waiting for the people who were to pick up the goods, it seemed strange to the merchant that the set time had long since passed. So he asked the guard to deliver the goods. The villagers of the mountain village were not the type to break agreements, and he was worried. Choi Han then introduced Roxu, who was telling him to go to that village with the guard, and immediately headed there. They went there not alone, but with Rosalind, and then they saw a terrible picture. All around were filled with smoke and flames, and on the ground lay the mountain villagers who had been sent to the grave. There, Choi Han saw something familiar, 5 red stars on a white star. Roxu was horrified to realize that according to him, there were members of a secret group there. In the novel, they did have a hand in the burning of the wolf village, but it was a group of mercenaries who were sent there, not the members of the secret organization. Not all of them died. They tried to take the surviving children away, and the chief who defended the village was on the verge of death. And when he collapsed, they managed to grab 10 kids. Roxu remembered that in the original, they had just killed them and wondered why they needed the little werewolves. And then a young man jumped out of the fire in front of the people who were trying to get those kids away. It was luck. But in the novel, he hid even when the children were sent to the afterlife. Roxu wondered why there was such a big difference between that and kidnapping. He clutched his head thoughtfully and realized that it was his wolf instinct to protect those closest to him who were weaker. But it was unclear why this instinct was suddenly awakened. Roxu was disappointed to realize that the story had changed a lot. Choi Han continued talking and said that he stopped them and tried to send them to the other world because he recognized these people. The black-clothed men without a star and the men who attacked Harris's village were cooperating. He could tell from the fighting techniques they used. Rock-Soo thought he should play it like he was hearing it for the first time. During the battle, Choi Han saw that among them was a man who had 4 scarlet stars on his chest, with 1 white star. This man sent a guard to the afterlife. He was one of the brats who drink wolf's blood, a mad magician bloodsucker. The act of terrorism in the capital square was led by someone, namely a blood-drinking brat of the wolf family. He was a big shot in a secret group crazy for blood. However, Rock-Soo now realized that his first appearance had already happened, not in the capital, but in the wolf village. He wondered why this mad, bloodthirsty mage of the highest rank was trying to kidnap the children of the wolf family he was going to destroy. Then he thought that the dragon's release might be connected to it, and that was the only change he could think of. In the end, Choi Han couldn't catch them or send them to the afterlife for one strange reason. If he caught them, they'd send themselves to the afterlife. Other people with 6 stars teleported out of there like that magician. Before teleporting away, the mage said it was a pity, because the wolf cubs would be good for seeds, and the blood of the children was much tastier. Rock-Soo listened attentively to his story and wondered what seeds he was talking about and what had happened to those children. To which Choi Han replied that they had moved all the children with Rosalind's magic, and they were now in the guest house with the merchants they were traveling with. Rock-Soo thought that all the adults of the tribe had died, and in addition to the remaining children, there were also traitors. But he thought irritably that from this story, he'd soon have a cattle yard here. He decided that Choi Han shouldn't know who they were and why they were doing this, but he wanted to know about it. Rock-Soo said that he would only tell him 2 things, and definitely not all of them, then got up from his chair and told him to get up too. He replied to Rock-Soo's surprised exclamation, "Then they are heading to the temple of the god of death." It was quite late in the day. A large white building stood before them. He said that here he would reveal 2 truths to him, but his life was at stake. But calling him after him, he decided to take the risk. Choi Han looked at him and the building carefully and followed him afterward. The Templars wished a peaceful rest to accompany them, after which Rock-Soo asked if they had any death room left. They looked at Choi Han, who had the face of an exhausted man who had been starving for several days. He had a conspicuous decency that made it easy for him to beat them up if they cheated in front of him. His clothes made him look like he'd been rolling down some high mountain for a long time. Then the Templars asked whose going to the afterlife would be the bet, to which he said his. Choi Han clasped his hand and started to say that there was no need for that because he would believe him anyway, but Rock-Soo smirked and said that wasn't true. He wouldn't have believed him, and he wasn't going to tell him about the secret group. Choi Han then has to fight the mermaids on the side of the whale family of the strongest werewolves. And in addition to them being dangerous and savage, he'll be associated with a lot of other people of all sorts, so he'd better not mess with him. Eventually, there was an empty room in the temple. The Templars called them to go into the dungeon and said they would prepare the room. They went downstairs, and one of the Templars asked them to wait outside while they prepared the room. Rock-Soo spoke to Choi Han and asked him if he could say one more thing in advance if he was really sincere recently. He said yes. And then he put his finger up and said he didn't know the true nature or purpose of the secret group. At these words, Choi Han was very surprised and wanted to ask what he meant, but they were distracted. At which point the Templars invited them into the room and said that the one whose departure to the other world would be the bet could simply raise his hand. Rock-Soo noticed that the surprised Choi Han couldn't believe all this and suggested that he go inside. He followed him in. They walked into a completely white room and sat in white chairs at a white table right in front of the standing temple master. After Rock-Soo raised his hand, the temple master pointed at the 2 white sheets lying right in front of them. As they both took the sheets in their hands, the Templar turned to the man who was staking his departure to the next world. He said that the hand of death would touch him and his companion, and then the oaths must be pronounced. If the oath is broken, the man who bet on his departure to the next world will go to the next world. After which, the Templar began to hold both hands above the table, and a black haze appeared around him. It was the power of God. Raising his hand to this haze, Rock-Soo thought that now, if he broke this vow, he would go to the other world. Then he said that it must be true that the temple bearer would hear nothing, or else he would go to the other world. Then he will tell the truth to Choi Han in front of the god of eternal rest, and if he lies, he will go to the other world. Then he thought about whether he should tell him everything, and remembered that he had thought about it before. Now he had to choose between two options. He is an ordinary Korean who fell into the book he was reading and therefore knows the contents up to the 5th volume, or fell into a book he was reading, and when he opened his eyes, he was the son of a rich aristocrat, and the world was about to fall into darkness, so he intervened in the plot. Any such answer could put him far away from his desired comfortable life here. Then he thought of going to the other world from the Continental War, or at the hands of Choi Han. The first thing he said was that he was not Kaylee Henitus, and genuinely did not know the true nature of this group. It was the truth. From the volumes he had read, he had only had time to learn about one action of a secret group. He did not know their goals or their true nature. He went on to tell a second, even more obvious truth. He hated them and wished they would disappear. Then Choi Han angrily exclaimed that how could he hate them if he didn't know anything about them? Then he said he knew some of their plans, like the Black Dragon and Lack. Then he told Choi Han that his former life as a bad man was the limit of his dreams, and he wasn't going to become the heir to the family. He wants Basin Henitus, his half-brother, to inherit the family line. Even though his father, the head of the house, told him to come here, he could refuse, but he came here for one reason only. He didn't know what the secret group was planning to do in the capital. Choi Han was very surprised by his words. He couldn't tell how he knew everything, but because he knew about their plan to kill a lot of people in the capital, he couldn't let Basin go. He wanted to stop them, but not at the cost of his emotional energy or his life. He wanted to end this as quietly as possible and return to his land. But he couldn't tell Choi Han or anyone else in the world how he knew it. Then he decided to tell him another truth. This time, it was the last one. He had no thoughts of hurting Choi Han. Choi Han was silent for a while, then clenched his fist hard and said he believed him. And then he asked him to swear to something else, and then he would totally believe and trust him. Although Choi Han didn't like to think so, he could easily avoid any problems by cleverly distorting the truth. Choi Han then said that it was the first time he hated someone so much, and if he found out their true identity, he would definitely have to tell them. Roxu agreed and thought it would be something more complicated, and especially he could hardly have known about it before Choi Han. Then he repeated that if he Kale Henitus found out their true identity, he would tell Choi Han, otherwise he would repay them with his death. Then they decided to finish, and Roxu lowered his raised hand, placing it on the white table. After which the Templars escorted them out, and said they wished them well. In other words, they were obligated not to break their vows to continue living. Roxu thought that was a pretty harsh goodbye. As he got into the carriage, he decided to add something about this blood-sucking mage. This mage would be in charge of the operation in the capital. Choi Han then sharply asked if he could send him to the other world at once. Roxu didn't understand the question and said it's up to him to send him to the other side of the world. After he got home, Ron suddenly knocked on his door. He brought him a cup of lemon tea. For Roxu, drinking lemon tea before bed was still a bit hard. Ron suddenly asked him if he could ask him something important. Roxu choked on those words. He found it rather odd that this hypocritical old man had a request for him when he thought he was nothing. But Ron only asked if he could take a couple of days off. After which, Roxu happily took his hands and told him that he had taken care of him for decades, and if he wanted to rest, he could do so at any time. But Ron had to return before the terrorist attack to be connected to Choi Han, so 2 days would be perfect. He was glad to have 2 whole days without the old man's company. Then he told him to wait for a while and pulled out a small drawer and took out a bag of money. He handed it to Ron and told him to have a wonderful vacation, eat more, and have a good time. Ron looked at the bag and thought it was suspicious. He'd been lurking long and carefully in the vicinity of what he thought was a puppy all this time. He thought it was time for him to put an end to all this and come out of the shadows, because if they make it to the Western continent, it's not going to be a simple riot. Then he would even have to leave his son here and go by himself. Ron smiled at Roxu and asked if he could really take the money. He replied that of course he could, because he had every right to do so. Ron had originally planned to leave quietly after a few days. He wanted to go alone, or with Bikros. He was just wondering what Roxu would say about his vacation for 2 days. Choi Han said he knew who he was. Ron looked at him carefully and said that these were too much, and then asked what he would do if he took them all and ran away. Then Roxu also cheerfully replied that he knew him, and if he planned to escape, he would do it silently without reporting back. In a hero's birth, Ron left the county just like that while Choi Han was warned whenever he needed to leave. Just like Ron has been watching Kale for years, Ron has been watching Kale for years. Ron thought that Kale might have known him a lot better than his own son, and that this was old age. Ron then said he'd be back on his way to the royal palace, to which Rock-soo replied to do as he pleased. Ron couldn't let Kale look worse than the other aristocrats in royalty. He bowed afterward and left, thinking he couldn't let anyone look down on the puppy he was raising. The next morning came. Rock-soo woke up in a bad mood to a knock on the door of his quarters. He was visited by a cheerful Hans, who brought him a cup with a lemon on top. Then he said loudly that Mr. Ron had said he could only entrust his work to him, remarking to himself that he was indeed impressive. Rock-soo told him to be quiet and asked why he had brought a cup of lemonade, to which Hans replied that he liked lemonade. He sipped a little, wondering why Ron would want to do that. At that moment, Choi Han came into the room. He remembered how Ron had come up to him last night and announced that he was leaving, and when he asked where he was going, he said it was none of his business. Then Choi Han guessed that he had only come to see him because of Mr. Kale, and then Ron defiantly slapped his hand and left. After Hans left, Rock-soo put on his jacket and noticed Choi Han standing in front of him and asked if Lak was awake. After his affirmative answer, he sat down at the table and motioned for Choi Han to sit down as well, thinking that the Wolf family had really fast regeneration. Then he began the conversation by saying that the bastard son of the Flynn Trade Guild's bastard son, their piggy banker Velos, would soon arrive in the capital. He promised him to return the borrowed items and have a drink with him. They've even picked a meeting place already. That's where Choi Han and Velos should make contact. He then asked Choi Han about being with the kids at the guest house, and Choi Han said he would stop by on his way back from his meeting. Then he wondered what it was about, and at that moment, Hans reminded him that Choi Han was talking about inviting the young heirs to the reception. He didn't care about those guys, so he forgot all about them. The thought of doing something bad there crossed his mind. Hans added that a guest had asked to see him. It was Lady Rosalind. Rock-soo noted that Rosalind was quite savvy for several reasons. She had never seen a dragon before, but she probably guessed that the source of the mana was a dragon. The mana she felt last night can only come from their own kind. Hans warned him that Rosalind could come over at any time. Then he said he would breakfast in the room and told him to prepare everything, and also to ask Lady Rosalind if she would not mind eating together. Hans jokingly whispered that it was noon, and therefore it was already lunchtime, and then jovially ran off to fulfill his wishes. Rock-soo also told him to open the door to the terrace, because the black dragon should have free access to the room. He found it odd that he seemed comfortable sleeping outside by the window on top of a tree. He concluded that Rosalind and Choi Han were taking care of the patient in shifts, but Choi Han added that he and Hong were also helping them, to which they replied that they were too weak to send someone of the wolf kind to the other world and would lose even during the rabies. So they had to figure out how to suppress them, and so they didn't help, they watched and learned. These guys weren't nursing, they just wanted to prepare for an enemy like this. Choi Han added that Lak feels better anyway when he has two such cute lumps around him. He didn't tell Lak or Rosalind that he brought them in on his orders. He kept it a secret. Rock-soo thought that Choi Han was only acting like this because of his oath to God. He just didn't know how flexible a word could be, and that the listener and the speaker are not on equal footing. God will only follow his interpretation of the oath, and he can exploit that gap because he's the one who took the oath. Then he remembered that he was going to send the blood-sucking mage to the other world as soon as he saw him again, to which he replied positively, and also thought he didn't hesitate at all. Then he said he would tell him how to find the magician. Choi Han was quite surprised, however. Rock-soo added that it is only after they prevent a terrorist attack. After these words, they were interrupted by Hans, who had brought Mrs. Rosalind, and added that if the young master and Mrs. Rosalind needed anything, they could call on him at any time. When Choi Han left for Lak, Rosalind thanked him for the invitation. Then he motioned for a seat. And then Rosalind noted that he was the kind of man who had a lot to talk about. After that, he turned to the window and told the black dragon to come in. Then a dragon appeared in front of them on a table full of all sorts of treats. Instead of greeting, the dragon frowned and said he was hungry. Then Rock-soo offered him something to eat. After which, Rock-soo smiled sweetly and announced that they should start eating as well. After starting, Rosalind thought with excitement that the young dragon lord was eating right in front of her eyes, at the same table as her and the same steak. If she told about that scene in the magic tower, no one would believe it. It was a truly astonishing sight for her as a mage. She hadn't expected a dragon to get along with a human. Then the dragon said that man is very weak and his physical strength is no good. That's why it's like this. A meal with young Master Kale and with young Master Dragon was a great honor to her. Then Roxu looked at her carefully, and the thought that she was not a timid person flashed through his mind. If it were any other mage, he'd probably be singing dragon songs with shaking hands by now, and tell him to teach him a little mana with a little magic. All the mages on the continent were literally obsessed with dragon magic. At the table, Roxu told her to make herself at home here and stay as long as she wanted. Then Rosalind turned to him and said she had 2 questions for him, and now there was only one. The first one was about whether or not he could have a guest who wasn't even invited. Even though she's a mage, something like this can be quite dangerous for a nobleman. Roxu replied that everything was fine because Choi Han had brought them, and added that he had nothing to fear because he had the dragon. Then she asked a third question about why he, being a nobleman, treated her so respectfully, to which he replied that she was a mage, and she has scarlet hair and eyes. She's a princess then, shouldn't she stop addressing him respectfully? And then he told the princess she could address him as you. Then she said that the head of the merchant squad said he was known to be a bad man, but that turned out not to be the case. He confirmed this, but added that mages should decide such things on the basis of their 5 senses and not on the opinion of others. Rosalind was quite unusual. She spoke informally on behalf of the princess, but when on behalf of the mage, she used polite speech. He noticed that she was much more inclined to her magical side than her other side. Afterwards, he asked if she had any questions, to which she replied in the negative. But she noticed that he didn't seem to want to get involved with her at all. She was fine with him letting her stay and leave as she wished. And he knew she was a princess. If she wanted to be treated accordingly, she would have revealed her full name and identity from the start. She also mentioned that he was a benefactor of Luck's story. Afterwards, he replied that he thought she didn't want to get involved with him. Rosalind thought it was a lie, because he was using it as a good excuse. She only knew of this dragon man as a bad man, but that wasn't really true. If he wished, neither she nor the Princess of Breck could be here. She then thanked Roxu for not notifying the royal family of her whereabouts, to which Roxu replied that there was nothing to thank him for he could not have done it without her wish, and yet the crown prince would have rushed here. Then she asked him that if the royal family ever brought it up to tell them that she insisted they not be told, and added that she'd send word as soon as she needed to. She was grateful that they'd given her a place to stay, and she'd take care of her own affairs now, trying not to involve them. When Rosalind reached for a plate of sausages, the dragon who was eating from the plate suddenly looked menacingly at her and told her to eat her own, because it was his. Rosalind looked at him in horror at this, greatly frightened. Roxu only looked at him, then at Rosalind, raised his hand, pointed 4 fingers, and whispered that he was only 4 years old. Then Rosalind stopped fidgeting and looked at the dragon and said that of course she wouldn't touch his food. After the meal, Roxu and Choi Han were in the carriage. Roxu thought about his problems, and Choi Han said he wanted to help a little, but he said he didn't need it. The northeastern aristocrats remember Kale's past and his behavior well, and rumors of incidents involving him had reached their lands. He had to be as careful with them as possible. Looking menacingly out the window, he thought it would be better for them to put on a worse show, but not to look like a bad person. After some time, they came to a county called Wilsman. When he got out of the carriage, he was greeted by one of the county servants. Wilsman County is a clan that owns land in the early Northeast. This family wasn't that rich or that powerful, an average family. So, in a Northeast alliance with no dukedoms or marquesses, the Wilsmans had the advantage of being firm friends with the likes of Hennetis County. Like the Hennetis clan, it was advantageous to make friends with the clan closest to the capital and not in the outskirts like the Hennetis themselves. Then he remembered Han's recent words that there would be other aristocrats at the meeting, so he'd better not relax and speak carefully. According to Hans, it was clear that Eric and Kale were quite close, but from the information he'd gathered, he didn't look like him. As he approached the house, he kept thinking about how he should behave with them. But later it turned out it wasn't so bad, and he was worried for nothing. After a while, he sat down at the table with the other aristocrats. The green-haired girl sitting next to him noted that she'd heard that Kale didn't like such formalities. Then one of the other aristocrats shouted that he might as well keep quiet and not squeeze a smile out of himself, for they could do it all themselves. At the end, he added that he didn't need to waste his time on any formalities. Rock-Soo was greatly surprised and began to comprehend his words. This was an extremely unexpected turn of events for him. At this time, he kept shouting that he could not talk or laugh, but just sit still, and they would do it themselves. Their behavior was very strange to Rock-Soo. Then he said that's what he's good at, which is sitting still. Eric is very sensitive, but generally has an easygoing personality. However, he is usually quite anxious as well. But Eric is not a shy guy because he's a man of contradictions. Eric went on to say that the other guys might be annoying. People connected with the Marquisate of Sten or any other duchy are not doing anything suspicious right now, and if he keeps quiet, they will solve everything. As expected, this was Eric's biggest concern. Currently, among the 10 major clans, their 4 clans were not related to anyone. Those who have allied themselves with other aristocrats plan to give their patrons the most influence at this gathering, which is why he has to be extra careful, because their 4 clans have to pull their own weight. And for that, the richest Henniges family, the most neutral in the northeast, must not be scandalized. After which, Rock-Soo agreed not to interfere, and Eric said that the 4 of them planned to greet the crown prince. He thought it would be a strain on Kale, and he would have preferred a drink right away, but it was worth it to be patient and just greet, and then they'd take it from there. After which, they all smiled and sipped a little from their glasses. Eric added that it would be enough for him to just go sit quietly and come back. Rock-Soo liked such good conditions for him, it was a desirable utopia. After which Eric said that, as expected, Hennides' grape wine is excellent. After a while, a panting Choi Han rushed over to Rock-Soo. Then he asked him about the guest house, to which he replied that everything was fine, and fortunately, the children were active. That meant there was nothing else to do today, and he planned to go to bed, so he told Hans not to wait at the door and to go to bed. Choi Han guessed in the blink of an eye that Rock-Soo was going outside. Then he turned around and said he'd leave the window open like last time to get him back into his room. Choi Han asked in surprise if the 2 of them would go together, and at the same moment, a dragon flew out to meet him and announced that he would go too. Choi Han then asked warily if they were going to destroy something, to which Rock-Soo replied in the negative. After which he told him to go out for a while and come back when he returned to cover his head with something, and wondered why he always had such radical thoughts. After Choi Han left, he covered his eyes, and then a dragonkin immediately flew over to him and asked him not to fall asleep. At this, Rock-Soo thought that it looked like he was the 4-year-old in his eyes, and got up from the bed. After a while, Choi Han appeared in the window with a cape over his head and shoulders, and after a moment, he landed on the floor. His cape was called a robe. When Rock-Soo saw it, he said that the robe was better than his headdress. Turning to the dragon, Choi Han asked if he was going to go like that, but the dragon said it would become transparent. Choi Han remembered that dragons were polymorphic and asked him if he could take on the form of a human, because that would be more convenient. The dragon said he hated humans and didn't want to become a human-like creature. And he was also told that dragons were arrogant and cool, and when asked who said that, he pointed to Rock-Soo. When they went out on the balcony, Choi Han asked him if he should carry him. But the man said nothing, and only raised his finger upward, pointing at the dragon. A moment later, he was enveloped by an almost invisible dome that lifted him into the air, and then Rock-Soo said that dragons are great. Then Choi Han looked at the sight and said that dragons were really great. Choi Han looked around and announced that the place was empty, and then Rock-Soo and the dragon came down after him. He noticed that the dragon's magic was stronger than he thought. His abilities were now a little higher than those of a high-ranking mage. As said, such an adult dragon can destroy an entire kingdom with a strong attack. But once Rock-Soo has the sound of the wind, he won't need all this, and neither will the accompaniment of these 2. The sound of the wind is an ancient power he wants to get next, but there's something he has to do to get it. Namely, to head for Lady Amir's territory on the northeastern seaboard of the Kingdom of Roan. On his way out of the capital, he will get the sound of the wind, then return to his lands. It bothered him in his heart that this ancient power was at sea, but it could be quietly taken away. Plus, a tribe of whales and mermaids first appear on the east coast, somewhere near the end of Volume 4. So since he's out, he decides to go on an excursion and come back after exploring the coastline and picking up the power. By then, their paths with Choi Han will be parted. In a little while, they were already striding through the capital. All around them, the inhabitants sat relaxing and enjoying themselves. Choi Han had noticed that the nights in the capital were lighter than anywhere else. Near the fountain in front of them, they noticed a family having fun with each other in the night capital. Then he asked the dragon to muffle them, so no one around him could hear what he wanted to say to Choi Han. And then he started telling me that there's this thing called a magic bomb. Magic bombs come in many different forms. The history of the Battle of the Western Continent is long as they've been in active use in magical warfare, so have their numbers. But in such a place, you can set a magic bomb, how much mana it will take, and so on. In general, in this case, a lot of subtleties, but there are advanced bombs, and in 6 days, those bombs will explode in the neighborhood, including this place. Choi Han and Rosalind in Birth of a Hero discovered 5 bombs, but now the story was distorted, so he doubted that the place and people would be the same. Circumstances can be twisted indefinitely, but he was sure a terrorist attack with a magic bomb would happen. They already made sure that the sick magician was in their country. After his story, Choi Han asked if the bomb would go off here. Rock-Soo replied positively and added that it could be buried somewhere or mounted on a person. Of course, the person won't even realize they're wearing a bomb, so they have to prevent it. Magic bomb is a mana clot, so they only need to find a place with increased concentration of mana with the help of the skill of its indication. But there's not enough of it in the bombs for them to feel. The concentration will not be so great, and a simple magician will not be able to detect it. But this clot of mana can become saturated with the mana of the environment, which will cause an explosion. Choi Han then noted that it didn't seem like it would be easy, but Rock-Soo looked at the dragonkin with a smile and replied exactly the opposite. Right now, they had a powerful black dragon, and it would have no problem with mana recognition, even without taking magic abilities into account. So finding the bombs was really a cakewalk for him. It would take at least 2 days to locate the bombs. At least one will be in this square because it's the most crowded. Then he told Choi Han that he and the dragon would go around the capital at night from this square. Their job is to find the bombs. Then he took Choi Han by the shoulder and said that he was good at stealth and his skills were excellent. Then he asked about what to do with the bombs when they found them, to which Rock-Soo replied that nothing yet, and added that they would destroy them on the appointed day, after which Choi Han asked why that was the decision. Then he asked, with a smile on his face, if he wanted to find that crazy mage. Whatever the magic bomb is, it takes a magician to detonate it. The magician who made the bomb must blow up the entire chain through the center link, which meant he'd have to find the bombs first, and it would be a good idea to find the people planting them as well. Rock-Soo thought it would be quite difficult to detect these people. However, to find places of small concentrations of mana, you will have to run around a lot, so it will be very hard and annoying. So he assigned the case to these two because he didn't want to do it himself. Rock-Soo then asked if that meant they'd have to wander around until 24 hours before the start. Rock-Soo replied that they would also have to come in a day, but on the day of the Emperor's arrival, the guards would be reinforced, and it would not be easy. Then he took out a magic ball and said that there would be a lot of mages there, and it wouldn't be used for more than 10 minutes, but that should be enough. 10 minutes is exactly enough time. All bombs will be disabled for 10 minutes. In that time, you can find people to hang them. They'll definitely be marked. And when that moment comes, there will naturally be Dragon and Choi Han, as well as an extremely large number of oppressed races. Then he told Choi Han to go and do his work, and pointed to a nearby house and said he would wait there. He told them to look around until 11 o'clock today and then come back. After that, Choi Han wondered why he didn't go with them. He replied that he would work hard, so he asked Rock-Soo to buy him a glass of beer after their hike, to which he agreed. Then he looked at the dragon and wished him good luck too, after which Choi Han and the dragon left. 2 days passed. Rock-Soo woke up and thought that they had spent 2 days looking for the location of the bombs, but they hadn't found anything. Almost as soon as he woke up, a voice came from outside the door. It was Ron. Seeing him in front of him, Rock-Soo thought that this was the end of his wonderful dream on a summer night, and the harsh reality had returned to him. Ron then handed him the letter. He opened it with a smile. It said that he wasn't planning to buy someone a drink, after which he asked Ron to pack a bottle of wine. Belos, the illegitimate son of the head of the trade guild, will soon arrive in the capital, which meant it wouldn't be long before he'd see the crown prince in the palace. After Ron asked if he remembered he was going to the palace the day after tomorrow. Before the king's congratulatory speech, a meeting of the noble heirs with the crown prince is to take place in the square, marking the beginning of the festival. It was a cross between a ball and a dinner party. The meeting would take place in the palace where balls are usually held. He wondered how things were between the abandoned son and the crazy temple maiden. Then he thought they must be doing well. Then he got annoyed at having thought of them at all and told them to get out of his head, and thought about the fact that in the palace he would be quieter than the grass, and even if someone started to harass him, he would sit silently and then go home. Ron asked him if he could escort him to the palace as a servant, to which Roxu replied that no one else could do it. The Eastern group Parasite, dominant in the criminal world, began to spread its influence to the Western continent. Parasite is just one limb of a larger organization whose true face is unknown to anyone. The Malin clan, one of the 5 great assassin clans, also tried to dominate the criminal underworld of the Eastern continent. An heir to this family, Ron Malin, hated and feared the Parasite. He lived a long time in hiding from them here, but the time had come for him to leave this land and his post. Ron said with a good-natured smile that there was no one in the palace who could match Kale, to which Roxu glowed and replied that in other words, he was good in face and body. After which he grimaced and wondered in bewilderment why Ron's voice was so kind now. After Ron bowed and said he had to go and report to Hans, but Roxu thought he was clearly over-rested. Ron added, before he left, that he'd ask Hans to get the best bottle of liquor. Then the kittens came into the room and said that if an enemy like the wolf let his guard down, they should be able to send him to the other side. They found a couple of ways to do it. Joy and pride in themselves shone in their eyes. Then they began to caress and rub against Roxu's legs. He was sitting there with a completely unperturbed face. Then they shouted that they heard the smell of a wolf, and Roxu told Lack, standing outside the door, to come in. He came in and was a little frightened when he asked what he wanted and told him to sit down. Lack hesitated a bit. Then Roxu said that he had obviously come to tell him something and told him to lay it out. Whereupon an overexcited Lack jumped up a little from his seat and thanked him loudly. Luck was naive, jittery, and generally quite stupid in appearance. This was a copy of the description of Lack from the novel. In the book, it was written that his character changed after the first rabies, but in reality, it didn't. Roxu replied to him that he really should be grateful to him, and if he was done bowing, he could go. After that, Lack shyly tried to ask for something or say something obviously hesitant. After that, Roxu told him to spill everything and added that he should look directly at his interlocutor while talking, and talk to him directly about what's on his mind, and then he'll listen to him. Then he fearfully started saying that he was the older brother and needed to take care of the younger ones. But he was also a nephew and a younger brother, so he must have his revenge. Luck has 10 little ones to protect and care for. Kin loved and protected this shy blue wolf. Lack could not forget his family of close friends and neighbors, which is why he's sure to repay the favor. The wolf lowered his sad eyes, filled with pain and despair. Roxu called him a wolf and said he'd heard that wolves protect family and put them first. For Roxu, this clan was the epitome of pride. After saying that, Lack was very happy. He thanked him again and asked for help, but Roxu said he didn't want to help him. He's been thinking about acting bad lately because of Choi Han and the dragon. The black dragon was a problem in itself, and the people Choi Han will continue to attract to him will be even more of a problem. So he couldn't throw his help around right now, but he was well aware of the bitterness of 10 wolves losing their family and home. He'd been through it himself and had one foot in it, but he didn't want to be responsible for it. But despite all these words and thoughts, he was ready to make a deal with him and asked him what kind of help he needed and what he could offer. Then he said to come to him as soon as he was determined, to which Luck responded positively and got up from the table and said he would come as soon as he was determined. After a while, Roxu arrived at the Palace of Joy. It was the name of the palace where dinner parties were held. It was a small palace built by the current king in honor of the crown prince's birth. In spite of this, the king now cared more for the third prince. Of course, the palace was nothing like the Hennetus family manor or a manor of so many years standing. It was huge and luxurious. As he wondered if Eric, Gilbert, and Omar had arrived, a certain carriage appeared a moment later right in front of him. As luck would have it, Benion's codger appeared right in front of this palace. He was a typical brute and antagonist. His name was Neo Tolls. He acted as if he were under the patronage of the second son and heir to the marquiship of St. Benion. The village where the Black Dragon was kept was just within the realm of the Viscounty of Tolls. In the Viscounty, disliked the county of Hennetus on principle. Their houses were separated by only one mountain, but the difference in condition was too great. But that did not prevent their houses from being on good terms. 5 years ago, he had fallen under the influence of the Marquis of Sten, after which he became so arrogant and self-righteous. Roxu thought irritably about why he was meeting him now. After his meeting with Kel, Neo told his servants to step down while getting leave because he didn't have long to talk to Mr. Kale. When everyone left, he said with mad eyes why he was accepting this event if they decided that such a terrible person should be here. Roxu thought he was a bore and began to ponder whether this was the fantasy world he had read about or if in reality such people could exist as well. Then he figured they might because one of them was poking him right now. He thought it was only in books when the son of a viscount had to speak like that to the son of an earl. It annoyed him. Before him stood a villainous brute who didn't know his place. After all, he could have asked Ron to send him to the other side of the world. Neo, meanwhile, began to provoke him by bringing up Kale's past behavior of throwing bottles at everyone. It was pure incitement. It was impossible to import magic items into the royal palace, but there was a dragon flying behind him. Neo thought that he couldn't have any magical items of recording devices on him, and that unleashed his hands. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a noise. It was an approaching carriage. Eric Gilbert and Omar came out of it and looked at both of them closely. Roxu then looked menacingly at Eric and asked to gesture to get rid of him. Then he cheerfully greeted Mr. Neo, noting that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Then Neo thought with anger that they cherished this bad man since they were on the same side as him. He suddenly noticed Roxu's gaze. He reminded him of Benyon, and then he felt a little stiff. Neo and Eric continued talking while Roxu rushed away from them. A dragon flying nearby said he recorded the entire conversation with his magic. Then Roxu thought he could make him cry bloody tears later with this tape. But for now, he's decided to let him sleep in peace, believing he's got nothing. After a while, Eric said goodbye to Neo and said they would see each other later at the dinner party. Once inside the palace, Roxu saw a lot of luxuries in front of him and thought it was not bad. Then Lady Amar told him that at the very top of the supper hall was the seat of His Highness, the Crown Prince. Only 5 tables were prepared in the hall: northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast, and center. Tables were divided according to the influence of each district. The Crown Prince was good at planning things like this. He literally pitted the aristocrats against each other in rivalries. That was to be expected of the Crown Prince. He had a high opinion of himself, for the second and third princes were a level below him. He was very sensitive even about such useless things. Such high-ranking personalities were not to Roxu's taste. Eric sadly said that their table was closest to the entrance, but Roxu liked it. He grabbed Eric's shoulder and explained that it was the opposite of a plus, that at their table they wouldn't have to bow to everyone who approached. To which Eric replied that he was glad because he felt what he said. After a while, it was announced that young Mr. Benyon Sten of the Marquisate of Sten had arrived. Neo was behind him. After that, Roxu looked at the angry dragon that jumped into his lap. He remembered the dragon at home saying it was all right because he was a great dragon. Before he left, he told the dragon that if he followed him to the palace, Benyon would be there because he was on the guest list. But you can't send him to the afterlife because it's a big day. And then he said he'd promise him something if he obeyed him and didn't send him to the afterlife. He stroked the frowning dragon and promised that he would send them all to the afterlife later, along with Benyon, and tear them to shreds. The dragon ended up being more rational than he thought. It wasn't like he was going to go crazy and wreak havoc. If that were the case, the dragon would just fly out of the palace and he'd say goodbye to the world. Benyon walked straight towards them, for the neighboring table was the northwest table, and so he had to pass them. Eric coughed to remind him to be quiet and calm, and Roxu considered pretending he didn't know Benyon. But their thoughts were interrupted by Benyon telling Roxu that they hadn't seen each other in a while. Roxu stood up and greeted him, adding that they had last seen each other in the lands of the Viscounty of Tolls. To which he replied that he was just returning from seeing his close friend, young Mr. Neo. Roxu confirmed that that was when they had met, adding that they had agreed to have a drink in the capital. Then said that the day after their meeting, a knight of the Viscounty of Tolls came to see him, and said that Mr. Neo's villa had been completely bricked up. Neo was very angry at these words. Benyon, in turn, also grew gloomy and said that he had heard about this sad situation. Then Roxu went on to say that he remembered being surprised the morning after his hangover when he heard about it, and started asking in shock that they'd lost something valuable in there. The most annoying talkers in the world are ignorant talkers and simpletons. Now he was playing all 3 of those roles. He was having a lot of fun. He exclaimed that when something so unpleasant happens, it's all forgotten with a bottle of alcohol, and offered Neo a hearty drink. After losing the dragon, Benyon's credibility has been shaken. According to the knights and the evidence, the faction that gave him the dragon, was first on the list of suspects. But he couldn't completely remove suspicion from a man who, by some unthinkable coincidence, was there at the same time. Then he pushed the thoughts away, thinking that such trash couldn't manage to steal a dragon from him. Benyon refused the drink, and Rock-Soo kept rambling on about that pale, as he said, knight who had come running to them. In the end, he said that it was impossible to lose all valuable things at once, but you can't get back what you've stolen, so you just have to move on with your life. After that, Benyon got very angry thinking about the escaped dragon and the missing disabled brother. Neo was just as angry. In the end, Rock-Soo told him to man up, but he thought Benyon wouldn't leave a piece of him. A little later, Antonio Kier of the Duchy of Kier and Lady Karen Orsena of the Duchy of Orsena arrived in the kingdom. When Rock-Soo picked up the bottle, Eric immediately called out to him and said he'd have a drink later. At the reception, everyone was having fun and talking to each other. Rock-Soo took the watch in his hand and looked at the time carefully. After a while, the Crown Prince appeared in the hall, accompanied by his two younger brothers. He began his speech by calling everyone the precious talents that would brighten his kingdom. Calling them outstanding individuals, he said he was glad to see them all here. Suddenly, Taylor and Cage appeared in the aisle, but not Rock-Soo, and just in time. Everyone around them began to look at them in surprise. They both decided to reveal their true identities at once. He thought it was a wise decision, but the order of God might give them a lot of headaches, but that was Cage's business. An angry Benyon jumped up from the table and glared fiercely at them both. The Crown Prince only spread his arms wide and said happily that he didn't expect to see the eldest son of the Marquis of Sten and the God's Temple Maiden here. Taylor said that he had heard that this was a place where aristocratic heirs could meet to talk to His Highness, so he had come without even an invitation. To this, the prince reminded that he said to come a representative of each clan, but if that clan is without a representative, it doesn't matter who comes. Then he told Taylor that it must be frustrating for him to send only one invitation, to which he replied that it wasn't much. Now the Crown Prince officially casually pointed out the position of Benyon's illegitimate heir. In a hero's birth, the Crown Prince was wary of the second and third princes worrying about them, and the Marquis of Sten were just close to the third prince. For Rock-Soo, it was strange because it was not easy to overthrow the Crown Prince, even if the king now treasured the third prince, and the aristocracy was putting a lot of pressure on him. Rock-Soo didn't want to know about it, so he didn't inquire. The Crown Prince replied to Taylor that he was sorry he had upset him, but in any case, he was glad he had come and noted that he was well. To which Taylor replied that even if his legs were still immobile, he still had his arms, his head, his eyes, his ears, his mouth, and it was all alive and growing stronger. To this, the Crown Prince replied that he had forgotten how strong a man is, who holds on to life to the very end. It was interesting for Rock-Soo to observe Crown Prince Taylor Benyon and the influential aristocrats in the area. Now that a single gesture could be enough to cause an instant explosion, it was quite entertaining for him to watch the faces of all those gathered. He thought all he needed in this room right now was popcorn. Next, he noticed Cage. She greeted him nobly and respectfully. Then he said they'd talk later, adding that it was time to enjoy dinner. He didn't know where best to put them, but he spotted a good spot. It was right behind the table where Rock-Soo was sitting. There were no other places except at their table. There were no high nobles. There were families under the wing of the highest aristocrats of the factions. But the balance at their table was still maintained, so the other high aristocrats couldn't unceremoniously touch them. And in the center of this table was the representative of the strongest and richest house among the separate clans. After the Crown Prince suggested that they sit at the northeast table because there was more room there than at the other tables. He also pointed out that they would all become specialists that would make a huge contribution to the kingdom, and it was better for them all to sit together. Then he asked them to move a little, after which everyone at the table complied with his request. Eric turned toward Rock-Soo and reminded him to be quiet. After a while, Taylor and Cage sat down at the table as well and cheerfully greeted everyone. Then the Crown Prince announced the continuation of the evening for the experts who will lead the future of this kingdom to eat together. Then he thanked all those who had come, and everyone began the long-awaited dinner. Lady Amir suddenly turned to Rock-Soo and announced that they were going to approach the Crown Prince soon to greet him. Rock-Soo sincerely didn't understand what the Crown Prince was up to. He definitely didn't gather the aristocrats out of gratitude, and he definitely had a reason. Of course, Rock-Soo had a couple options on that. Perhaps it was because of the battle. It was about to unfold in the southwest of the continent. or the crown prince might have noticed the beginnings of a civil battle in the kingdom of Viper. The dragon had noticed that the humans were good at cooking and warned that there were magical recording devices at every corner. Rock-Soo suddenly realized something. The crown prince was now observing the noble heirs. Of course, the second and third prince knew about it, which meant it was the entire royal family's plan. He smiled at his guess. After a while, Eric said they had to go, and then everyone at the northeast table got up and went to the crown prince to greet him. The first crown prince greeted Eric after he bowed, and added that they had something to discuss. Eric was surprised by his words. Albert Crosman's luxurious golden hair was proof of the patronage of the sun god, and also a distinctive mark of the Crosman family. After his surprise, Eric happily whispered that he needed to talk to him too. Then Albert said that he would not dare postpone a conversation with the linchpin of his kingdom with a subject territory from the very beginning of his country. After saying that, Rock-Soo thought that he had already used his big mouth. And then Albert turned his attention to him and said that he was in charge of the end of the Northeastern District. It was their first meeting, but it was their county that allowed them not to fear the Forest of Darkness. This fact soothed Albert's soul and inspired security. Albert also added that he had heard that he was a man of loose morals and sincere in soul as much as he was voluble in character. Rock-Soo imagined how hard it was to find praise for someone as bad as Kale, and in that sense, he admired him. After their handshake, he was not going to be silent, and said that if His Royal Majesty was the sunshine for them all, and worries about the welfare of the citizens even at night, he can be compared to the moon holy to them all. These were words Albert did not expect to hear from Kale. The three behind him were also surprised, but he continued to talk about how he couldn't sleep tonight because of the impression of meeting the prince. This scene should have brought Rock-Soo closer to keeping the crown prince away from him. The dragonkin noticed that Albert had dyed his hair with some kind of magic that only a dragon or similarly powerful creature could do. His eyes were also colored, and then the dragon thought that there was definitely some hidden agenda here and told Rock-Soo to be careful with him. The dragon pointed at Albert and said that this man was not weak at all, and by talking to him, Rock-Soo would risk going to the other side of the world. The novel clearly stated that physically the crown prince was developed normally, however it seems he was not weak. In fact, the current queen is the mother of the third prince, and the crown prince's mother is a concubine. She was a commoner working as a maid in the royal court, and he knows she died when the crown prince was a child. The crown prince mistook Choi Han for an ordinary man, but it was unknown what he himself might be hiding, although Rock-Soo was not concerned with that at all. Albert noted that Rock-Soo seemed to have something in common with him, to which Rock-Soo said it was the greatest honor of his life. After the greeting, he backed away from the crown prince a bit and thought it wasn't all for nothing. He did not understand why the crown prince was wary of the second and third prince, and why the third prince had suddenly become the king's favorite. Then he came to the conclusion that maybe the firstborn wasn't his son at all. But he wasn't sure what he was guessing and decided it was best to stay out of it. He turned to Lady Amir and said that he had heard that the coasts of their lands were incredibly beautiful and asked if the view was good. She replied positively, adding that the sea cliff was especially good, at which Rock-Soo thought about how he had no idea how to get the sound of the wind on it. The third ancient power was the sound of the wind. It was a power that a member of the Magic League had acquired during the Civil War of the Viper Kingdom, because he was a mage-slaying tyrant who appeared in the second half of the Civil War. It was therefore of little or no value to him. The magic tower was about to fall. It would fall after the Civil War, and Rosalind would become the mistress of the new tower of the Western continent. A trio consisting of Choi Han, the Crown Prince, and the Magician Destroyer will appear. Each of them had been involved in all the incidents in the north-central region. The Jungle Queen of the southwestern continent will unite the southern region. There were hints at the beginning of the book that Rosalind would then become involved with them. If we turn a blind eye to Choi Han's constant clashes with the faction, this continent will become a military arena for the first time in 200 years of peace, where the battle for supremacy will be fought. But of course, Rock-Soo was not concerned. Then he asked young Mr. Gilbert if he could leave when it was all over, to which he replied in the affirmative. After the dinner party, a meeting with His Highness was planned, but Rock-Soo wasn't going to go, explaining that the three of them knew more about investing than he did. Then the Crown Prince mouthed that he had really enjoyed tonight's dinner, and afterward there would be a simple wine party for those who wished to attend. And for them he reserved seats at the birthday party, adding that he would be happy to share the joy of the day with them. In other words, they had to be there, and that meant they'd be right in the square at the time of the explosion. And that was the end of his dinner. When Rock-Soo left, a happy Kage said goodbye to him, calling him brother, but he told them he didn't want to be any brother. Suddenly, Lady Amir called out to him. She said she'd see him off, then he asked if she was afraid he'd do something on the way. But she replied that young Mr. Neo had also left earlier, thus fearing that he might now make a scene. She noted that he had done well today, to which he replied that he would have to try harder because they could use good results. Because the east coast of the northeast was considered extremely useless land. Not only was the cliff precipitous, but there were whirlpools of water right next to it. Of course, the experienced locals knew how to maneuver their boats between them, but for all other people, this place was extremely dangerous. But it was the ancient power of the sound of the wind that was the trouble. Amir and Gilbert wanted to secure investment in this useless sea by any means necessary. Lastly, Rock-Soo told her that His Highness was clearly interested in this investment, and thought that they had worked hard today so they could help out a little bit, and it was worth strengthening their neighborhood. And according to the summary of the aristocratic children, Amir knew how to keep her mouth shut. Then he asked if she had talked about investing in tourism, and if they needed funding urgently, it was worth considering the coastal advantage between the Viper Kingdom and the Northern Kingdom. She was surprised, and then he added that he wanted this conversation to be just between them. Amir replied that she would take that into consideration. Then Ron closed the carriage door, and Rock-Soo told them to depart. The seacoast in the northwest was mostly sandy, but not in the lands of Amir and Gilbert. They had a complex coastline fragmented into many small islands, which in turn were surrounded by a sheer cliff. So far, peace has prevailed, so they have only developed the tourism sector. But the Crown Prince knew that soon all peace in his lands would come to an end. Rock-Soo thought that before the Mage Destroyer started walking around there, he would have to get to the ancient power first anyway. When he arrived home, he found a panting Choi Han, who reported that they had discovered 4 magic bombs. All those bombs were right next to the square. Then Rock-Soo told him to show him the map. When Choi Han found the first one, he immediately grabbed the dragon in his arms and ran around the neighborhood, searching thoroughly. That's how he found the other 3 bombs. But there was nothing else. After that, the first thing they did was to search other crowded places, but no other bombs were found. In Birth of a Hero, 5 bombs were on people and 5 in the neighborhood. But in reality, it looks like 4 will be in the neighborhood and 6 on people. After Rock-Soo told Choi Han not to hurry because it would be safe until after tomorrow's party, and added that the day after tomorrow at dawn, they would hide them. Choi Han had a surprised reaction to these words. Rock-Soo knew that for these bombs to explode, their inventor had to give a signal, but interrupting it was easy enough. And it wouldn't take long for someone like the Black Dragon or Rosalind to defuse the bombs on the people Rosalind was supposed to defuse. It had to be done on the same day, so the Mad Magician could rest, assured that everything was going according to plan. Choi Han was surprised that they would repurpose the bombs instead of destroying them, to which Rock-Soo replied that there was no reason to destroy such a useful item. He said he'd find a use for them and use not the bomb itself, but the mana concentrated in it, because it's pretty useful stuff. Then he said there might be more bombs, so he told them to keep looking and periodically check to see if the location of the bombs had changed. Next, Choi Han and the Black Dragon will have to continuously search all around the square, hiding their presence. It's going to be hard, monotonous, and unnerving. With a glance at Ona and Hong, he told them to go help too and thus pay for the food. On the birthday of the ruler of the Kingdom of Rowan, it was learned that Velos had arrived in the capital. After a while, Rock-Soo and Lack were riding in a carriage, sitting opposite each other. Then Rock-Soo remembered how Lack had told him that taking care of his youngest would be part of the deal, and in return, he and his youngest would help him. At this point, to lighten the mood in the carriage, Lack began to tell the story that the Blue Wolf clan was famous for its order. Rock-Soo interrupted him and turned away, saying it was the first time he'd heard of it. Then Luck timidly said that if he hadn't heard the story, he could tell it, to which Rock-Soo replied that he didn't have to. And yet he realized that he was offering to take 10 wolves into his care and make a knighthood out of the pack. Luck was wildly afraid of the whale family, but was ready to rush to their head for the sake of his companions. This wolfman offered to take on a bunch of reckless kids who could outsmart the cultists at any moment. Rock-Soo was puzzled as to why he had first asked him for their protection and now was offering something contradictory. If he created an order of them now that they're children, given the mores of the wolves, they'd definitely become a gang. Rock-Soo then asked Lack about their opinions and why he was deciding for them. He started apologizing again. Then Rock-Soo said he understood his request, and it was up to him to figure out what to get from him in return. Of course, he's already figured out what he wants in return, but not now, 3 months from now. There's an ancient power on a dangerous mountain that could make a little money. It'll be there for about 6 months, where he could use the rabies of a wolf werewolf. If he saved that power for later, he could sell it to the queen of the jungle. He would have secured his future, even if the county should fall, for the rulers had no money and he had found a use for it. Lack got sad and asked about whether he really couldn't help him in any way. Rock-Soo said not to ask stupid questions and to say his condition, which he would fulfill no matter what he demanded. Then he threw him a bag of money and told him to meet his brothers and walk around the capital, to which he was very much surprised. Rock-Soo added that they could eat something delicious, and he and Hong would go with him, so they wouldn't get lost in such a big city. He needed to get all the kids away for a quiet talk with someone. Then he thought he'd have to give the kittens to Hans or find them another caretaker. Ideally, it would be someone who was a good cook and a good housekeeper. When he uttered the words thrifty and good cook, he immediately thought of Bikros. Just because he had good manners didn't mean you should just throw innocent wolves to the wolves. When he got out of the carriage, Locke looked at the house in front of him carefully, and then Rock-Soo called out to him, telling him to follow him. Then they went inside the guest courtyard. They were greeted by a man who kindly invited them into a place filled with the aroma of grapes, and Rock-Soo told him to open the door himself. Then Locke put the kittens down on the ground and walked to the door, opening it a little hesitantly. When the wolves saw him, they immediately rushed to him and hugged him happily. Then Belos suddenly appeared next to him. It was with him that Rock-Soo had a meeting scheduled for today. When Rock-Soo greeted Velos, another figure appeared beside him. It was Odious Flynn. He was the head of the trade group that accompanied Velos. It was an honor to meet Kale, because he had heard so much about him from Choi Han, after which Rock-Soo spoke of what an honor it might be to meet a bad man like him. Odious Flynn was a serious contender for the head of the Flynn Trade Guild, but turned it down. He became a lifelong character running a small trading group and was also Belos's uncle. He connected Choi Han to Belos and made Belos realize his hidden insatiability. To Rock-Soo, he was an even murkier person than Ron. He pretended to be a simple manager of a small trading group, but in reality, he was hiding an important person of the underground market under another mask. Rock-Soo laughed and said that this was how Flynn was connected to Velos. But he was surprised and did not know that Velos was his acquaintance. He had been looking after him since he was a child, so he was very happy to meet him. Flynn was a man who had bailed out of a trade group and lived a completely mediocre life, and was also known for his benevolent uncle. Odious was the only character Velos had fond memories of. To Velos, he was a good man. After the meeting, Rock-Soo suggested that we have a drink, and when Choi Han and Rosalind arrive, we can think it over. Odious laughed and said that he would also like a chance to drink with the young master, to which Rock-Soo replied that it was definitely worth it. Seeing the pack of wolves in front of him, he thought it was a headache and they should be looking for a full-fledged trainer instead of a nanny. And then he thought he wasn't going to do that and waved them off, telling them to go for a walk. Looking out the window, Velos wondered what he was doing here. To which Rock-Soo, sitting at the bar, merely replied that he was ensuring a serene old age. Then Velos poured himself a glass of alcohol and immediately drained it and put it on the table loudly. He immediately began to pour himself a new one, at which Rock-Soo jokingly asked if he was joking with him, and added that he didn't know why he was so nervous, but he was sad to see him drinking alcohol like that alone. And then he began to pour himself a glass too, at which time Velos said that Odious was his blood uncle. Velos, who was not allowed to be called by the last name Flynn, couldn't even properly call his uncle uncle. But Odious was the only adult who was kind to him. When he was a child, he told him he thought he was his nephew because he had the right to be. Those words were the starting point and impetus for Velos, and then he met Choi Han through Odious. Captivated by his power, Velos will follow Choi Han and break into the struggle between the heirs to become the head of the trade guild. After Velos asked about whether he wasn't wondering why Mr. Odious was the head of a small trade group, even with the last name Flynn. Then Rock-Soo replied that he shouldn't be interested in that last name, and added that the one Odious was still the Flynns to him. Velos sadly said that he was a bastard.